Breaking the Vicious Cycle, Intestinal Health Through Diet by Elaine Gottschall. Forward. Upon discovering food and the gut reaction, the first edition of Breaking the Vicious Cycle, Intestinal Health Through Diet, I realized that it contained a useful solution for the dietary treatment of many gastrointestinal disorders. By introducing the approach of the Specific Carbohydrate Diet, it enables patients to thrive on a varied diet that very often reduces symptoms and allows healing of an inflamed intestinal tract. Simply presented, yet sophisticated in its conception, the Specific Carbohydrate Diet transcends several oversimplifications to which patients with gastrointestinal problems and their physicians often fall prey. Several years ago, my book, 7 Weeks to a Settled Stomach, Simon & Schuster, was published. Since that time, I have earned a reputation as a troubleshooter for gastrointestinal problems. Patients from many parts of the country have consulted me. Many complain of symptoms consistent with irritable bowel syndrome. Others have been diagnosed formally with classic inflammatory bowel disease. And though some patients have responded well to the usual arsenal of natural digestive aids, intestinal flora replacement, elimination diets, conventional antifungal drugs and antibiotics, still others found no relief. Food and the Gut Reaction, the first edition of this book, was introduced to me by a colleague and friend, Dr. Leo Galland. He mentioned the book after one of his patients brought the book to his attention. I immediately recognized Elaine Gottschall's book as a potential godsend to my patients. Its value lay in providing a palatable but potent alternative to those dietary approaches commonly in use for management of gastrointestinal problems, the high-fiber diet, the low-fat diet, the low-residue diet, the anti-yeast diet, the gluten-free diet, and other elimination diets. Based on my experience with patients, I already had reason to question the complex carbohydrate plan as the most healthy eating program, especially for patients with gastrointestinal complaints. Many gastroenterologists, like most North American physicians, propound this low cholesterol diet plan. Fat, it is reasoned, is the bane not only of arteries but also of the intestinal tract, in combination with excess animal protein. So it is said, fat sets the stage for a host of Western ills from diverticulosis to appendicitis and colon cancer. Unquestionably, some patients are excellent fiber responders, but others do poorly with common sources of roughage. The radical alternative, a meat and salad diet that eliminates all sugars and starches, is unpalatable and unenforceable for all but the most dedicated patients. In fact, this strict vegetable and protein diet, sometimes referred to as the caveman diet, is dangerous for marginally nourished, underweight patients with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. One oversimplification Elaine Gottschall's book avoids is the notion that food allergy is the source of many gastrointestinal complaints. Since dietary manipulation can produce results, it is, perhaps, natural to assume this. But over-reliance on the ambiguous results of allergy testing leaves many patients incompletely treated. The more sophisticated belief that it is not individual foods themselves but the byproducts of ingestion of certain foods that cause intestinal problems is fast replacing the concept of food allergy. This theory was first set forth by Dr. 1.0. Hunter in a landmark Lancet article in 199-1. Elaine Gottschall's Specific Carbohydrate Diet is an acknowledgement of Hunter's theory. Another recent Lancet article underscores the frequency of intolerances to corn, wheat, milk, potatoes, and rye. This may be the reason why patients who derive inconsistent benefits from the gluten-free and lactose-free diets respond so completely to the regimen set forth in Elaine Gottschall's book. This diet addresses carbohydrate intolerance more broadly than other approaches. The second edition of Food and the Gut Reaction, Breaking the Vicious Cycle, Intestinal Health Through Diet, should be among the vital resources of every gastroenterologist. Other corrective strategies amount to a preoccupation with eradicating intestinal pathogens. Those who take this approach believe in the find a bug, use a drug philosophy. Elaine Gottschall substitutes the more holistic goal of re-establishing the healthy balance of intestinal flora. As I began placing patients on the specific carbohydrate diet, using food and the gut reaction as a comprehensive guide, I became impressed with the results. Many patients with Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel syndrome and even refractory constipation, found relief although their progress had been stymied previously with elaborate but unsuccessful elimination schemes. The clinical value of the specific carbohydrate diet was unquestionable, but interestingly, I began to notice other unanticipated benefits. Patients with muscle aches, stiff joints, and even full-blown arthritis, chronic skin rashes, psoriasis, generalized fatigue, and spaciness were alleviated. Elaine Gottschall's diet had probably reduced intestinal toxicity. Unfortunately, the chances of wider acceptance of dietary approaches like this one are small. While many of my innovative, nutritionally oriented colleagues have availed themselves of food and the gut reaction and introduced patients to this approach, most gastroenterologists are, sadly, not even curious. They scarcely acknowledge the role diet can play. For example, a recent Lancet article demonstrating the efficacy of the exclusion diet in the treatment of Crohn's disease has not prompted a single gastroenterologist in my large metropolitan community to administer a facsimile of the successful diet to patients, even when their diseases do not respond to the most skillfully administered drug treatment. Fortunately, increasing numbers of patients are recognizing the need to break away from total dependency on drugs and symptom-oriented medical care. Many have endured years of suffering, coupled with economic and mental stress, and they are willing to try a wholesome diet, grounded in medical research, which makes sense. The reception given to food and the gut reaction, the first forward edition of this book, by patients has the makings of a true grassroots uprising. Patients, en masse, are willing to try the diet and many are finding that it works. Elaine Gottschall is a tireless crusader on behalf of her natural approach to digestive problems. She selflessly gives of her time, love, compassion, attention, and concern to patients and clinicians alike. She has become an energetic cheerleader for many of my patients and has provided invaluable direction when progress has faltered. Her reward is surely the secure knowledge that she has made a difference in the lives of thousands of patients with gastrointestinal disorders. Ronald L. Hoffman, M.D. Hoffman Center 40 East 30th Street, New York, New York, 10016 June, 1994. Chapter 1 Past and Present. In 1951, after many years of clinical experience, Drs. Sidney V. and Merrill P. Haas published a book entitled Management of Celiac Disease. Directed to the medical community, the book documented the doctors' experiences in treating and curing hundreds of cases of celiac disease as well as cases of cystic fibrosis of the pancreas. Their approach was dietary, and they used a well-balanced, normal diet that was highly specific as to the types of sugars and starches allowed. When patients followed this specific carbohydrate diet for a minimum of 1 year, they were then able to return to a normal diet with complete and permanent disappearance of symptoms. In 1958, we took our 8-year-old daughter to the Drs. Haas. 3 years before she had been diagnosed by specialists as having incurable ulcerative colitis and her condition was deteriorating. The years of treatment with cortisone and sulfonamides, plus innumerable other medical approaches, had been unsuccessful and surgery seemed imminent. The Drs. Haas placed her on the specific carbohydrate diet and within 2 years she was free of symptoms. She returned to eating normally after another few years, and has remained in excellent health for over 20 years. Many students, friends, and others whom I have seen in my practice who were suffering from ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, celiac disease, not cured by a gluten-free diet, diverticulitis, and various types of chronic diarrhea have tried the Haas diet and most of them are now free of their respective diseases. Some of the most dramatic and fastest recoveries have occurred in babies and young too. Chapter 1 Children with severe constipation and among children who, along with intestinal problems, had serious behavior problems. These included autistic type hypoactivity as well as hyperactivity, often accompanied by severe and prolonged night terrors. Very often the behavior problems and night terrors cleared within 10 days after initiation of the Specific Carbohydrate Diet. It is interesting to note that in June 1985, the Schizophrenia Association of Great Britain launched a research project to investigate Dr. F. C. Dohan's research concerning a relationship between celiac disease and schizophrenia. The basis for this project is a strict grain-free, milk-free, low-sugar diet, closely related to the specific carbohydrate diet. 2,3 Meanwhile, in research laboratories throughout the world, investigators have been studying intestinal problems. Physicians and researchers have found that a special type of synthetic diet, chemical nutrients assembled in the laboratory, called an elemental diet, shows great promise in the treatment of digestive and intestinal problems of all types. The malabsorption problem seen in cystic fibrosis of the pancreas as well as diarrhea which occurs after cancer chemotherapy have been overcome by the use of the synthetic elemental diet. 4,5 When used for patients with Crohn's disease, not only did symptoms disappear but children who had not grown properly for years showed dramatic weight and height gains while on the diet. 6 The level of sodium chloride in the perspiration, the sweat test which measures the severity of the condition, of children with cystic fibrosis of the pancreas decreased dramatically when these children were given the elemental diet. Over 600 scientific publications have appeared in medical journals in the 1970s and early 1980s testifying to the fact that this elemental diet is effective in correcting malabsorption and reversing the course of many intestinal disorder. However, since the elemental diet is an artificial diet, usually administered via a stomach tube, it cannot be continued indefinitely. When it is discontinued, usually after 6 to 8 weeks, improvement gradually decreases and symptoms usually return. Past and present. 3 The common denominator underlying the effectiveness of both the natural specific carbohydrate diet and the synthetic elemental diet is the type of carbohydrate which predominates. In the synthetic elemental diet, the principal carbohydrate is the single sugar, glucose, which, in biochemical circles, is called a monosaccharide. Mono equals 1, saccharide equals sugar, as contrasted with a 2-sugar disaccharide such as sucrose, table sugar, or a many-sugar polysaccharide such as starch. Each circle represents a single sugar molecule A1. Monosaccharide 2. Disaccharide 3. Polysaccharide. Figure 1 $/dietary carbohydrates in the natural specific carbohydrate diet. The carbohydrates are also predominantly single sugars, those found in fruit, honey, properly made yogurt, and certain vegetables. The many research reports indicating that the synthetic elemental diet is beneficial in intestinal diseases provide support for the specific carbohydrate diet which can be used in the home. Those who choose to follow the specific carbohydrate diet need not feel deprived. Many of the delicious recipes in Chapter 1 this book could easily be part of any gourmet cookbook. The fact that they are so appealing, however, in no way compromises the underlying scientific reasoning. The carbohydrates specified in the recipes are biochemically correct. The specific carbohydrate diet presented in this book is highly nutritious and well balanced. It is safe and very likely to be effective in overcoming many lingering and vexing intestinal and digestive problems. Chapter 2 Scientific evidence relating to diet. The distressing and debilitating intestinal problems seen today have existed for centuries. The names given the various conditions with the symptoms of diarrhea, excess gas, loss of weight, excess mucus, cramping, blood loss, and severe constipation have changed throughout the years. The methods of diagnosis as well as those of treatment and management have also changed with time. But always, there has been a strong underlying belief that diet is an important factor to consider, not only in determining the causes of the disorders, but also in their treatment and cure. The medical literature is rich with reports relating the favorable effects of dietary changes on the course of intestinal disease. As far back as 300 AD, a Roman physician described in detail a diarrhea condition sounding like celiac disease and suggested that fasting, along with the use of the juice of the plantain, a member of the banana family, would cure the disease. In 1745, Prince Charles, the young pretender to the throne of England, suffered from ulcerative colitis and was said to have cured himself by adopting a milk-free diet. 2 During the early 1900s, numerous physicians brought further insight to our understanding of the effect of food on intestinal problems. Dr. Christian Herder, a physician and professor at Columbia University, noted that in every case where children were wasting away with diarrhea and debilitation, proteins were well tolerated, fats were handled moderately well, but carbohydrates, sugars and starches, were badly tolerated. He stated that ingestion of some carbohydrates almost invariably caused a relapse or a return that time, of diarrhea after a period of imprevement. About 6 Chapter 2 Dr. Samuel G., another world-renowned children's specialist, saw clearly several important facts that continue to be missed by modern researchers. Dr. G said that if the patient with intestinal disease could be cured at all, it would have to be by means of diet. 5 He added that milk was the least suitable food during intestinal problems and that highly starchy food, rice, corn, potatoes, grains, were unfit. Dr. G stated, "We must never forget that what the patient takes beyond his power to digest does harm. Any food, and particularly carbohydrate, given to a person with intestinal problems should, therefore, be a food that requires little or no digestion so that the digestive process itself will not stand in the way of the absorption of the carbohydrates. Contrary to what some may think, undigested, and therefore, unabsorbed, carbohydrates are not passing harmlessly through the small intestine and colon and out in the feces, but, somehow and somewhere in the digestive tract, are causing problems. There is much recent evidence to support the hypothesis that the course of several forms of intestinal problems can be favorably changed by manipulating the types of carbohydrates ingested. Cystic fibrosis patients have responded remarkably well to the removal of certain carbohydrates from their diets, especially refined sugar, sucrose, and the milk sugar, lactose, as well as starch. Lactose has been implicated over and over again in ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, and other types of intestinal disorders referred to as functional diarrhea. 3 The removal of lactose from the diets of patients with these problems has resulted in remarkable improvement. Crohn's disease research has yielded some dramatic results relating to carbohydrates in the diet. In the 1980s, 2 reports appeared in the medical literature. The first reported the results of Drs. von Brandis and Lorenz Meyer of Marburg, West Germany, who brought about remissions in 20 patients with Crohn's disease by forbidding foods and beverages containing refined carbohydrates, mainly sucrose and starch. And the second study involving 20 patients with Crohn's disease, dietary changes involving the scientific evidence 7 elimination of specific foods, particularly cereals and dairy products, resulted in sustained remissions. The physicians conducting the research concluded that dietary manipulation might be an effective long-term therapeutic strategy for Crohn's disease. A recent medical textbook on the subject of inflammatory bowel disease reported the results of 20 worldwide studies on the eating patterns of patients with ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease prior to the onset of symptoms and subsequent diagnosis. 2 of 3 studies on the dietary habits of ulcerative colitis patients showed a high consumption of bread and potatoes along with a high intake of refined sugar, sucrose. In one of the studies, a large one comprised of 124 patients, it was concluded that a dietary factor in ulcerative colitis cannot be dismissed, especially in relation to bread. 26 In this same textbook, the results of 17 studies dealing with Crohn's disease were reported, and all studies found sucrose intake to be higher in Crohn's patients than in people without Crohn's disease. The author of the report stated, "The consistency of this finding is remarkable considering the variety of countries and methods used to carry out the studies." Among the patients in the 17 studies reported, it was found that sucrose intake varied from between 20% to 220% more in Crohn's patients than in people who did not develop Crohn's disease. In concluding, Dr. Heaton, author of the report, stated, "The connection between Crohn's disease and a sugar-rich diet is proved beyond reasonable doubt. Apart from smoking, This is the strongest clue to an environmental etiology of the disease. 26 Dr. Claude Morin of Hospital Saint-Justine, Quebec, reported his results in treating 4 children who were suffering from long-standing Crohn's disease. When Dr. Morin administered, via a stomach tube, a synthetic elemental diet containing the monosaccharide 8 chapter 2 glucose, a single sugar, as the main carbohydrate source, the children showed remarkable gains in both height and weight as well as remission of their symptoms. 21 Unlike sucrose, lactose, and starch, glucose requires no digestion and is, therefore, more likely to be absorbed by the cells of the small intestine. This predigested sugar can easily pass through the intestinal absorptive cells, enter the bloodstream, and nourish the body. Glucose in the synthetic elemental diet as well as glucose found in fruits and honey is not beyond the power of those with disturbed digestive systems to absorb. Dr. Jan Vannies of the University of Texas Cancer Center reaffirmed this principle by stating, "The gastrointestinal mucosa, surface, of children is especially prone to damage from diarrhea and, as a result, disaccharide intolerance." The development of disaccharide-deficient formulae and of elemental diets gave a means by which physicians could allow patients to recover without drastic measures. 22 Dr. Vannies did not elaborate on the conditions that lead to the inability to digest double sugars, disaccharides, nor did he state how diarrhea is related to the problem of disaccharide digestion. More recently, however, Dr. J. Rainier Poley of Eastern Virginia Medical School has shown a link between diarrhea and the inability to digest starch and disaccharide sugars. 23 By microscopically examining the intestinal surface of patients with various forms of diarrhea, Dr. Poley found that most patients have lost the ability to digest disaccharides because of excessive mucus production by intestinal cells. An abnormally thick layer of surface mucus appears to be preventing contact between the disaccharides and the digestive enzymes of the absorptive cells. Sugars that need digestion cannot be processed and, therefore, will not be absorbed to provide nourishment for the individual. Dr. Poley has shown this phenomenon to take place in those suffering with celiac disease, gluten-sensitive enteropathy, soy protein intolerance, intolerance to cow's milk protein, intractable diarrhea of infancy, chronic diarrhea in children, parasitic infections of the intestine. Science JC Evidence 9, Giardia, cystic fibrosis of the pancreas, and Crohn's disease. Reasons for the production of excessive mucus will be discussed in greater detail in the next chapter dealing with intestinal microbes. Carbohydrates, sugars and starches, will be discussed in Chapter 5 in order to understand how some are more likely than others to escape digestion and, therefore, absorption. It will become clear that when this occurs, they remain in the intestinal tract and are utilized by the microbial world of the intestine, which depend on this available carbohydrate for injury to small intestinal surface, increase in bacterial byproducts and mucus production, are impaired digestion of disaccharides, flow Gerd 2 chain of events, bacterial overgrowth, malabsorption of disaccharide, the energy the microbes need to live and multiply. 24 Yeast and bacteria change the carbohydrates in ways that can injure the intestine, which may respond to these microbial byproducts by secreting excessive mucus. A chain of events, figure 2, is then established. At present, it is difficult to pinpoint the first step that triggers the cycle involving dietary carbohydrates and intestinal microbial growth. As far back as 1922, in a speech to the medical community entitled, "Faulty Food in Relation to Gastrointestinal Disorders," Dr. Robert McCarr-Eisen warned his colleagues that intestinal diseases were increasing. He asked them to remember that microbes, often blamed for intestinal disease, are dependent upon the conditions of life, especially nutrition, which frequently prepare the soil of the 10 Chapter 2 body for the growth of these microorganisms. 25 It is reasonable to believe that undigested, unabsorbed carbohydrates remaining in the intestine can serve as the soil of the body, which encourages the growth of microorganisms involved in intestinal disorders. In various conditions, a poorly functioning intestine can be easily overwhelmed by the ingestion of carbohydrates, which require numerous digestive processes. The result is an environment that supports overgrowth of intestinal yeast and bacteria, thus either initiating the chain of events or perpetuating it. The purpose of the specific carbohydrate diet is to deprive the microbial world of the intestine of the food it needs to overpopulate. By using a diet which contains predominantly predigested carbohydrates, the individual with an intestinal problem can be maximally nourished without overstimulation of the intestinal microbial population. Chapter 3 Intestinal Microbes, the Unseen World. The two most hazardous things an astronaut takes into his capsule on extended flight are his brain and his intestinal flora. F. Bengtsson, a man is only what his microbes make him. Copel FL. It is generally accepted among physicians and researchers that during intestinal upsets and chronic intestinal disease, the normal, harmonious state of balance between intestinal microbes living in our gastrointestinal tract is lost. It is important, therefore, that we have some understanding of the inhabitants of our unseen world. Before birth, the human intestine is free of microbe from the moment of birth. However, a massive invasion of the gastrointestinal tract takes place and it soon becomes populated with various types of microbes depending on the type of milk ingested as well as other environmental factors. Some of the microbial growth develops from contact with the mother's skin, some originates from the air. If the infant is breastfed, more than 99% of all microbes in the intestine are of one type. 3 As other foods are introduced, the baby develops a wide variety of bacteria. Studies have revealed that eventually more than 400 bacterial species live together in the human colon. 52 The stomach and most of the small intestine do not normally have intestinal flora, the venous bacterial and other microscopic ormskphi in the intestinal contents. Chapter 3:12 Harbor more than a sparse population of microbial flora. However, the number of microbes normally increases at the lowest part of the small intestine, the ileum, because of its close proximity to the microbial-rich colon. 5 In the healthy intestinal tract, intestinal microbes appear to live in a state of balance, an overabundance of one stomach pancreas transverse colon, jejunum, descending colon, meldal of small intestine, flogger 3 The intestinal tract intestinal microbes, the unseen world 13 type seems to be inhibited by the activities of other types. This competition between microbes prevents any one type from overwhelming the body with its waste products or toxins. Another important protective factor which works to maintain the sparse bacterial population of the stomach and upper small intestine is the high acidity of the stomach's hydrochloric acid, in which microbes cannot usually survive. In addition, normal peristalsis, waves of involuntary muscular contractions, sweeps many microbes out of the intestine to be lost in the feces, thereby decreasing their numbers. However, bacterial overgrowth in the stomach and small intestine can and does occur for various reasons, among which are 1. Interference with the high acidity of the stomach through the continual use of antacids, 2. A decrease in the acidity of the stomach such as occurs in the aging process, 3. Malnutrition or a diet of poor quality, and the resulting weakening of the body's immune system, 4. Antibiotic therapy, which can cause a wide range of microbial changes. A microbe commonly residing in the intestine without harmful effects may undergo a wide range of changes as a result of antibiotic therapy. Once the normal equilibrium of the colon is disturbed for any reason, its microbes can migrate into the small intestine and stomach, hampering digestion, competing for nutrients, and overloading the intestinal tract with their waste products. Quite early in bacterial overgrowth of the small intestine, the normal absorption of vitamin B is disturbed. There is considerable evidence that B12 is poorly absorbed when microbes multiplying within the small intestine prevent uptake by the ileum. There has been a long history indicating that bacteria and yeast are involved in intestinal disease. As far back as 1904, an examination of the stools of children who were 14 Chapter 3 suffering with what appeared to be celiac disease, revealed abnormally large numbers of fermentative, carbohydrate eaters, and putrefactive, protein eaters, bacteria, which were, undoubtedly, contributing to the disease process. The physicians making this observation proposed that although the normal intestine controlled the growth of bacteria, In celiac-type cases, some intestinal abnormality prevented the normal regulatory control. 14 Early researchers working on ulcerative colitis believed this disorder to be caused by bacteria. From 1906 to 1924, numerous researchers isolated certain types of bacteria, injected either the bacteria or the bacterial toxins into laboratory animals, and claimed that the injections produced ulcerative colitis in the animals. 15-N 1932, when Dr. B. Crohn spoke about a new intestinal disorder which he called regional ileitis, now known as Crohn's disease, some physicians attending his lecture stated that this new disease entity might be due to microorganic RNS. From the 1920s until the present, the role of microbes and the products they produce continues to be investigated in an effort to find the cause of the various NHAS forms of inflammatory bowel disease. VFT. There been very convincing evidence that particular bacteria could initiate a certain type of intestinal disease, but, eventually, the work has been dismissed because of insufficient proof. Some of the difficulties which these investigators experienced in trying to pinpoint the culprit microbes were undoubtedly due to the ever-changing conditions of the microbial world of the intestine, to variability in the strains of intestinal microbes, or to the lack of precise laboratory techniques of identification. During these early years of investigation, Dr. Ilya Mechnikov proposed that bacteria in the intestine were producing toxins which were then absorbed into the bloodstream. These toxins, Mechnikov stated, were the cause of many human afflictions, and he named the process by which harmful microbes in the intestine cause disease, autointoxication. Unlike investigators who unsuccessfully attempted to find the precise microorganisms involved in the Intestinal microbes, the unseen world 15 various types of intestinal disorders, Mechnikov approached the problem quite differently. He maintained, as many others have done, that if the intestinal environment can be kept in a healthy state, harmful microbes will no longer be a threat. 30 He advocated the widespread use of acidified, fermented, milk, similar to yogurt, and proposed that the beneficial bacteria used in producing the fermented milk, and still remaining therein, would enter the intestinal tract and prevent other bacteria in the intestine from forming harmful toxins. While Mechnikov's proposal has not been universally adopted, his ideas are acknowledged by outstanding gastroenterologists and researchers. In 1964, Dr. Donaldson stated in a lengthy article about the role of bacteria in intestinal disease, in certain respects the concept of autointoxication offered by Mechnikov must now receive serious reconsideration. I2 investigators continue to be fascinated by Mechnikov's proposals and to study the potential benefits of acidified milk. Modern researchers are asking, do the bacteria used to ferment the milk actually take up residence in the intestine, and, if so, for how long? Which of the yogurt-type bacteria used to acidify milk will counteract is the bacti toxins produced by other intestinal rhea used to acidify the milk or the acidified, fermented, milk itself the beneficial factor? 29 In the 1980s an increasing number of reports have been published stating that intestinal bacterial toxins appear to be injuring intestinal cells and, as a result, causing a variety of diarrheal diseases. Some of the bacteria producing these toxins have not, in the past, been considered to be disease-causing types. Although there is still insufficient evidence to link a specific microbe to each of the chronic intestinal disorders, it is generally agreed that intestinal microbes are not innocent bystanders. A simple approach to minimizing the undesirable activities of intestinal microbes would seem to be through the use of antibiotics. This approach is often tried, but, 16 Chapter 3 Unfortunately, in most chronic intestinal disorders, it has limitation. 48 We are faced, then, with intestinal disorders which involve microbial populations which have been altered in number, in kind, or both. The normal contractions, peristalsis, of the intestinal muscles are not able to remove them, they appear to be tenacious. Indeed, there is evidence that intestinal microbes will not cause disease unless they develop methods of adhering to the gut. Antibiotic therapy is of limited usefulness, while other drugs of the cortisone and sulfa families have side effects if continued too long. A sensible and harmless form of warfare on the aberrant population of intestinal microbes is to manipulate their energy, food, supply through diet. Most intestinal microbes require carbohydrates for energy, and the specific carbohydrate diet severely limits the availability of carbohydrates. By depriving intestinal microbes of their energy source, their numbers gradually decrease along with the products they produce. Chapter 4: Breaking the Vicious Cycle of All Dietary Components. Carbohydrate has the major influence over intestinal microbes. Through a process of fermentation of available carbohydrates remaining in the intestinal tract, microbes obtain energy for continued maintenance and growth. The fermentation process by which intestinal microbes consume dietary carbohydrates is diagrammed below: F//acetic lactic acid plus other microbe. Byproducts bacteria and undigested sugar molecule remaining in the intestine. Figure 4: carbon dioxide gas, hydrogen gas, methane gas, sometimes alcohol. Energy for microbial growth. Intestinal fermentation. Fermentation is encouraged when the diet contains carbohydrates which remain in the intestinal tract rather than being absorbed into the bloodstream. Unabsorbed carbohydrates constitute the most important source of gas in the intestine. For example, the lactose contained in 1 ounce of milk, if undigested and unabsorbed, will produce about 50 ml of gas in the intestine of normal people. But under abnormal conditions, when intestinal microbes have Chapter 418 moved into the small intestine, the hydrogen gas production may be increased over 100-fold. The presence of undigested and unabsorbed carbohydrates within the small intestine can encourage microbes from the colon to take up residence in the small intestine and to continue to multiply. This, in turn, may lead to the formation of products, in addition to gas, which injure the small intestine. Examples are lactic, acetic, and other acids, Fig. 4, which are short-chain organic acids resulting from the fermentative process. In addition to the damage to the intestine, there is a growing body of scientific evidence that lactic acid formed from fermentation in the intestine causes abnormal brain function and behavior, which could account for the behavioral problems which often accompany intestinal disorders. This would also explain the dramatic improvements in behavior noted in Chapter 1. The formation of large amounts of lactic acid resulting from the fermentation of unabsorbed carbohydrates is prevented by following the specific carbohydrate diet. Figure 5: The vicious cycle. B. Chronic diarrhea. 4. Increased metabolic intestinal water drawn into intestine. A. 4. Carbohydrate malabsorption. 1. Breaking the vicious cycle. 19. The production of large amounts of short-chain organic acids by bacterial fermentation in the intestine may ultimately prove to be an important clue in discovering the cause of some forms of inflammatory bowel disease. A recently published paper in Science entitled Grain Feeding and the Dissemination of Acid-Resistant Escherichia coli from Cattle casts a new perspective on the effect of these organic acids in changing bacterial characteristics. Since the early 1980s, medical research has shown that some forms of ulcerative colitis appear to be caused by a commonly found intestinal bacterium, Escherichia coli, which, as a result of a change in its characteristics, a mutation, has developed the ability to produce DIEASE. Although there are numerous reasons as to why harmless forms of bacteria might change their characteristics through genetic mutation, the question could be asked: is the fermentation of undigested, unabsorbed starch by intestinal bacteria in the human colon causing an acidic environment which could cause harmless bacteria to change to harmful forms? Once bacteria multiply within the small intestine, the chain of events diagrammed in Figure 5 develops into a vicious cycle characterized by an increase in the production of gas, acids, and other products of fermentation which perpetuate the malabsorption problem and prolong the intestinal DIOR. Bacterial growth in the small intestine appears to destroy the enzymes on the intestinal cell surface, preventing carbohydrate digestion and absorption and making carbohydrate. Is at this point drats available for further fermentation. That production of excessive mucus may be triggered as a self-defense mechanism whereby the intestinal tract attempts to lubricate itself against the mechanical and chemical injury caused by the microbial toxins, acids, and the presence of incompletely digested and unabsorbed carbohydrates. The specific carbohydrate diet presents a method for breaking the cycle by maximally nourishing the individual and minimally nourishing the intestinal microbes. By this 20 Chapter 4 method, undesirable stresses on the intestine decrease. The diet is based on the principle that specifically selected carbohydrates, requiring minimal digestive processes, as will be discussed in Chapter 5, are absorbed and leave virtually none to be used for furthering microbial growth in the intestine. As the microbial population decreases due to lack of food, its harmful byproducts also decrease, freeing the intestinal surface of injurious substances. No longer needing protection, the mucus-producing cells stop producing excessive mucus, and carbohydrate digestion is improved. Malabsorption is replaced by absorption. As the individual absorbs energy and nutrients, all the cells of the body are properly nourished, including the cells of the immune system, which then can assist in overcoming the microbial invasion. The practical specific carbohydrate diet aims for the same goals as the clinical synthetic elemental diet, the reduction and change of bacterial growth and the maintenance of the optimum nutritional state of the patient. Chapter 5 Carbohydrate Digestion. Digestion is the great secret of go and summer skill. What the patient takes beyond his ability to digest does harm. Geel 2 While the underlying causes of the various intestinal disorders cannot be stated with certainty, faulty digestion and malabsorption of dietary carbohydrates may be, in large part, responsible for these disorders. Carbohydrate refers to starch and disaccharide sugar molecules, both require digestion before absorption. As we have seen in previous chapters, this can lead to more serious malabsorption of all nutrients due to injury to the intestinal surface. The specific carbohydrate diet most often corrects malabsorption, allowing nutrients to enter the bloodstream and be made available to the cells of the body, thereby strengthening the immune system's ability to fight. Further debilitation is prevented, weight can return to normal, and, ultimately, there is a return to health. Malabsorption is the inability of the cells of the body to obtain nutrients from foods eaten. As a result, the caloric energy, vitamins, and minerals are lost as all parts of the body are deprived of the proper nourishment. There are many places in the gastrointestinal tract where problems could lead to malabsorption. 1. If food travels too rapidly through the intestinal tract, as happens most often when diarrhea is present, there is insufficient time for large food molecules such as starch, fat, and protein to be broken down by various enzymes and, consequently, their absorption into Chapter 522. The bloodstream is seriously impaired. 2. If a poorly functioning pancreas does not deliver sufficient digestive enzymes to the small intestine to break down larger molecules of protein, fat, and starch, absorption of these nutrients will not take place. However, a large number of research reports point to a later step in digestion as the site leading to malabsorption in many intestinal. This last step in the digestive process occurs at the microvilli of the cell membranes of the intestinal absorptive cell. Microvilli dietary disaccharides. Figure 6 Splitting 00 enzymes, the 00 disaccharidases OO, solid circles, 0 completely O-digested disaccharides now enter the bloodstream nucleus. Tall, healthy, mature intestinal absorptive cell. The membranes of cells lining the intestinal tract serve as more than a passive barrier between the contents of the digestive tract and the bloodstream. When the digestive system is functioning normally, the membranes of these gatekeeper cells actively participate in the last step of digestion as well as aiding in the transport of nutrients into the bloodstream. The last step in carbohydrate digestion takes place at the minute projections called microvilli, Fig. 6. Only those carbohydrates which have been properly processed by the enzymes embedded in the microvilli can cross over the bari is where the milk sugar, and enter the bloodstream. This lactose, and sucrose, are split apart, digested. This is also starch 2 of saliva and pancreas digestive enzymes. Figure 7 Lactose, sucrose, maltose, maltose disaccharides, double sugars, glucose and glucose monosaccharides, single sugars, glucose and fructose, a glucose and galactose, lactase, sucrase, glucose and glucose, maltase, maltase. Enzymes of intestinal cell microvilli, Disaccharidases, digestion of dietary carbohydrates. Chapter 524. The site of the last step in the digestion of starch from such foods such as grains and potatoes. Figure 7 summarizes the steps involved in carbohydrate digestion in the gastrointestinal tract and lists the microvilli enzymes which carry out the last step of the digestive process. The structure of the intestinal surface is dramatically altered during intestinal disease and, as a result, digestive activity is seriously inhibited. This makes the last step in the digestion of these carbohydrates difficult, if not impossible. Fig. 8. Few or no enzymes. Dietary disaccharides. Nucleus. Figure 8. Undigested disaccharides remain in intestine flattened, injured, immature absorptive cell. The location of the sugar-splitting enzymes, the disaccaridases, in the membranes of the intestinal cells makes them very vulnerable to damage from many sources. A vitamin deficiency of folic acid 29, for example, and/or of BIZ, can prevent proper development of the microvilli which carry the disaccaridases. An abnormally thick layer of mucus produced by the intestinal cells can prevent contact between the microvilli enzymes and the disaccharides lactose, sucrose. Addition, irritating or toxic submaltose and ismaltose instances produced by yeast, bacteria, or parasites which have invaded the small intestinal tract can cause damage to the intestinal cell membranes, destroying their enzymes. I3 conditions involving the small intestine that are frequently associated with deficiencies of lactase and other disaccaridases are celiac disease, malnutrition, tropical sprue, cholera, gastroenteritis, infant diarrhea from any cause, pellagra, irritable colon, post-gastrectomy, removal of part of carbohydrate. Glucagon 25 stomach, I4 soy protein intolerance, intolerance to cow's milk protein, intractable diarrhea of infancy, parasitic infections of the intestine, cystic fibrosis, and Crohn's disease. 45s 14,16 18. In addition, lactase deficiency in ulcerative colitis is well documented, as was noted in Chapter 2. The first enzyme to suffer damage is usually lactase, but often there is a combination of enzyme loss involving sucrase, isomaltase, and, less often, maltase. The enzyme, lactase, is depressed earlier than the other disaccharide splitting enzymes in intestinal disturbances such as celiac disease, and other conditions where diarrhea is present, and is the last of the microvilli enzymes to return to normal after intestinal disease has subsided. In fact, lactase may be permanently depressed after severe malnutrition and tropical diarrhea, sprue, and a deficiency of lactase may be the sole legacy of some previous disorders. It is difficult to prove the absence of disaccharidase activity by present medical techniques. A biopsy sample of the small intestine during intestinal disease may show that enzyme activity of disaccaridases is normal. However, upon feeding lactose, sucrose, and starch, cramping, diarrhea, and vomiting will follow. This apparent contradiction could be due to a lack of contact between the enzymes and sugars caused by the mucus barrier referred to in chapters 2 and 3. When a biopsy sample does indicate that there is a deficiency of disaccharidase enzyme activity, the reason could be a primary genetic problem or a secondary problem caused by a direct injury to the intestinal cell surface with loss of the microvilli and a flattening of the cell itself. Among those factors which lead to injuries of the intestinal surface are malnutrition and irritation caused by substances produced by microbial growth. L5. L6. The sugars, then, remain undigested in the small. Their presence in the lumen, interior space, of the intestine causes a reversal of the normal nutritional process. Instead of nutrients flowing from the intestinal space into the bloodstream, water is drawn into the intestinal lumen, Fig. 5. The water, carrying nutrients, is lost in abnormal intestinal function, diarrhea, and the cells of the 26 Chapter 5 body are deprived of energy, minerals, and vitamins. Most seriously, the sugars remaining in the intestinal lumen provide energy for further fermentation and growth of intestinal microbes. The increasing levels of irritating substances given off by the growing microbial population cause intestinal cells to defend themselves. Mucus-producing cells, goblet cells, which are normally present in the intestine, secrete their product to cover and protect the naked free surface of the intestinal absorptive cells. The small intestine responds to a disruption of the normal balance by producing more goblet cells, which increases the secretion of intestinal mucus. As the integrity of the small intestine is further threatened by the microbial invasion and by the products it produces, a thick mucus barrier forms for self-defense. The enzymes embedded within the absorptive cell membranes cannot do the job for which they are designed, to make contact with and split certain sugars in the diet. If the goblet cells become exhausted, and there is a limit to their valiant efforts to defend the absorptive lining against irritation, the naked intestinal surface is subject to further ravaging. It is very possible that, at this stage, ulceration of the intestinal surface, as seen in ulcerative colitis, can occur. This might also explain how certain proteins such as gluten can inappropriately enter the interior of the absorptive cells and destroy them. Sometimes, but not often, even the absorption of single sugars is disturbed because of severe injury to the absorptive cells, but this extreme condition is usually diagnosed by routine hospital tests. 18 Sometimes, the invasion of microbes into the small intestine is so pervasive that yeast, for example, will be found in the esophagus. 19 When it is suspected that yeast invasion is widespread, the oral infection, thrush, would be an indicator. It is wise to cut back on honey ingestion at the beginning of the dietary regimen. Amount of honey in recipes should be decreased by at least 75%. The amount of honey may be increased as the condition improves. Carbohydrate digests and the indigestibility of starch by even healthy people is only recently receiving attention. See descriptions of starches following. Some starchy foods which were assumed to be digested completely are, in fact, incompletely digested by people with intestinal disorders, most people. In those the digestibility of starch is even further affected. Because the breakdown of starch eventually results in the formation of the disaccharides, maltose and isomaltose, most starches must be avoided unless they are specified as permissible in Chapter 9. Some foods in the specific carbohydrate diet contain starches which have been shown to be tolerated. These are the starches of the legume family: dried beans, lentils, and split peas, no chickpeas, soybeans, or bean sprouts. The legumes which are permitted must, however, be soaked for at least 10 to 12 hours prior to cooking and the water discarded, since they contain other sugars which are indigestible but which can be removed by soaking. The legumes may be introduced in small amounts at about the third month of the diet. The starches in all grains, corn, and potatoes must be strictly avoided. Corn syrup is also excluded since it contains a mixture of short-chain carbohydrates found in foods. 1. Single sugars, monosaccharides. These sugars require no further splitting in order to be transported from the intestine into the bloodstream. They are glucose, fructose, and galactose. Glucose and fructose are found in honey, fruits, and some vegetables. Galactose is found in lactose hydrolyzed milk, LHM, and in yogurt. 2 double sugars, disaccharides. These sugars require splitting by intestinal cell enzymes. There are 4 main disaccharides: lactose, sucrose, maltose, and isomaltose. Lactose is found in fluid milk, dried milk powder, commercial yogurt, homemade yogurt which has not been fermented for 24 hours, processed cheeses, 28 Chapter 5, cottage cheese, cream cheese, ice cream, some sour creams, whey, 70% lactose by weight, and many products which have added milk solids or whey. Many drugs and vitamin and mineral supplements have added lactose. Sucrose is table sugar and is found in processed foods such as gelatin, desserts, ketchup, cereals, many canned foods and some frozen preparations. See appendix. There is a small amount of sucrose, about 1%-3%, in some pasteurized honey, but it has been shown to be tolerated by those on the specific carbohydrate diet. Unpasteurized honey contains virtually no sucrose since an enzyme in the honey splits whatever sucrose may be present. Some fruits and nuts contain small amounts of sucrose, but they may be used and have been included in Chapter 9. As fruits ripen, some of the sucrose they may contain is split by enzymes within the fruit. Maltose and isomaltose are found in sources such as corn syrup, malted milk, and candies. However, most of the maltose and isomaltose which is presented to the intestinal cells for digestion comes from dietary starches. Starches are long chains of glucose molecules, Fig 9, which are digested, in part, by enzymes from the pancreas and saliva and are left as the disaccharides, maltose and isomaltose, to be split by microvilli enzymes of intestinal cells. 3. Starch, polysaccharides. Starch can be of two types called amylose and amylopectin. Most vegetables contain both types in various proportions. For example, some kinds of rice contain small amounts of amylopectin starch and large amounts of amylose starch. Other types of rice contain only amylopectin starch 0.25 like rice. Some genetic strains of corn contain a very highly branched amylopectin type of starch. Sweet potatoes or yams also contain only amylopectin starch. It appears that genetic breeding which attempts to change the protein content of certain crops also affects the types of starch formed by the plant. The varying proportions of different kinds of starch might affect the ability of the intestine carbohydrate Ryan 29 to completely digest them. Or, the proteins of certain plants may prevent the starch from being completely split. 27. It is interesting to note that one group of researchers have found that some intestinal bacteria are made more virulent by the presence of undigested cornstarch in the intestine. Az6, vegetables that contain more amylose than amylopectin starch are simpler to digest, because the glucose units which make up all starch molecules are arranged in a linear fashion in amylose starch and are readily exposed to digestive enzymes from saliva and the pancreas, Fig 9. The links holding the glucose units in these linear arrays are amylose amylopectin. A small circle in the above diagrams represents a glucose molecule. Figure 9. Starches split until the chains are reduced to only two chemically linked glucose molecules called maltose. By comparison, amylopectin molecules contain glucose units which form branches, Figs 9 and 10. When the amylopectin molecules have been partially digested by pancreatic enzymes, the fragments remaining for the last step in digestion by microvilli enzymes are both maltose and isomaltose. Recently, Dr. Gottschall and associates proposed that the amylopectin starch molecule is even more highly branched than was thought originally. 28. According to Dr. Gottschall's diagram, the interior branches appear less exposed than the exterior branches. It is, therefore, possible that pancreatic digestive enzymes can Chapter 5 not reach the interior links and that parts of the amylopectin starch molecules escape digestion, remain in the intestine, and increase microbial fermentation. Figure 10. Revised diagram of arnylopectin starch. At present, very limited information is available as to the amounts of amylopectin and amylose starch present in the many kinds of grains and other starchy foods. Fiber. Fruits, vegetables, nuts, and grains contain various components, termed fiber, which are indigestible by the enzymes of the digestive tract. Fiber from fruits, nuts, vegetables, including dried legumes, is allowed on the specific carbohydrate diet, but all other fiber from grains, including bran, is not permitted. Chapter 6. The celiac story. The last rhyme anyone counted, there were 15,000 named diseases of man, and cures for 5,000 of them. Yet it remains the dream of every young doctor to discover a new disease. That is the easiest and surest way to gain prominence within the medical profession. Practically speaking, it is much better to discover a new disease than to find a cure for an old one. Your cure will be tested, disputed and argued over for years while a new disease is readily and rapidly accepted. Michael C. Arkton, celiac disease appears to have always existed. Because its numerous symptoms mimic those of several other conditions and because an obvious cause has been elusive throughout the years, its recognition as a distinct disorder and one which physicians could readily diagnose has been fraught with disagreement. One of the first descriptions of this disorder was given in the early years of the Roman Empire by the physician, Arrhetius, who refers to celiac disease as a chronic diarrhea condition consisting of undigested food, lasting an extended period, and a debilitation of the whole body. 2 Arrhetius described the diarrhea as being light in color, offensive in odor and accompanied by flatulence. Additionally, the patient is described as emaciated and atrophied, pale, feeble, incapable of performing any of his accustomed works. In 1855, Dr. Gull, writing in Guy's hospital report outlined the symptoms found in a 13-year-old boy that clearly suggests celiac disease as we understand it today: enlarged 32 chapter 6 abdomen, frequent and voluminous stools of a dull, chalky color. A few years later, in 1888, Dr. Samuel G. laid the foundation for not only describing the condition, but also establishing criteria for diagnosis. Additionally, he established guidelines for successfully treating the condition with a dietary approach. In Samuel G.'s classic report, on the celiac affection, he wrote, "There is a kind of chronic indigestion which is met with in persons of all ages, yet is especially apt to affect children between 1 and 5 years old. Signs of the disease are yielded by the faces, being loose, not formed, but not watery, more bulky than the food taken would seem to account for, pale in color, as if devoid of bile, yeasty, frothy, an appearance due to fermentation, stench often very great, the food having undergone putrefaction rather than concoction. The causes of the disease are obscure. Children who suffer from it are not all weak in constitution. Errors in diet may perhaps be a cause, but what error? For despite the meagerness of G's information about celiac disease, he saw clearly several important facts that escaped many later investigations. 1. If the patient can be cured at all, it must be by means of diet, and that cow's milk is the least suited kind of food, that highly starchy food, rice, sago, corn flour, are unfit. 2. We must never forget that what the patient takes beyond his power of digestion does harm. G implied that unfit foods played more than a negative role and actually produced a pathologic condition in the digestive tract. For many years there were numerous reports on the cause as well as the treatment for what appeared to be celiac. While these inconsistent and inconclusive reports appeared in Europe, there was much less interest in North America. Shortly after the turn of the century, however, Drs. L. M. E. Celiac Slate 33 Emmett Holt, Sr., Director of Children's Medicine at Bellevue Hospital, and Christian Herder of Columbia University worked together for over 7 years on the clinical as well as the theoretical aspects of this disorder. Their conclusions, published in 1908, entitled On Infantilism from Chronic Intestinal Inzion, included the following main points. 1. There is a pathological state of childhood marked by a striking retardation in growth of the skeleton, the muscles, and the various organs, and associated with a chronic intestinal infection characterized by the overgrowth and persistence of bacterial flora belonging normally to the nursling period. 2. The chief manifestations of this intestinal infantilism are arrest in the development of the body but maintenance of good mental powers and a fair development of the brain, marked abdominal distension, a slight or moderate or considerable degree of simple anemia, the rapid onset of physical and mental fatigue, irregularities of intestinal digestion resulting in frequent diarrheal seizres. Drs. Holt and Herder continued in their monograph to describe the dominant bacteria found in the stools as well as some of the byproducts of intestinal fermentation and putrefaction. They noted that fat appeared in the stool and attributed this to impaired fat absorption. Also, note was made of increased mucus in the stool along with evidence of abnormal shedding of intestinal cells. They continued to stress that 2 leading features of this intestinal infantilism must be further investigated: 1. The retardation of growth, 2. The chronic intoxication. They commented that retardation in growth could be attributed to malabsorption of nutrients, and the malabsorption could probably be due to a chronic inflammation located in the ileum and colon associated with the presence of abnormal forms of bacteria. The chronic intoxication, they were certain, resulted from the action of products of bacterial origin, with the toxins having as their main target the nervous system and muscles. Chapter 6. They concluded their treatise by stating, temporary relapses are very common in the course of this disease, even when great care is being taken to prevent them. The most frequent cause of such relapses is the attempt to encourage growth by the use of increased amounts of carbohydrates. Although Herder's conclusions failed to gain acceptance, his observations were so perceptive that further researchers stood on his shoulders in pursuing the most effective dietary treatment. He saw that in every case proteins were very well handled, fats were handled moderately well, while carbohydrates were badly tolerated, almost invariably causing relapse or a return of diarrhea after a period of improvement. He said, "It has been already mentioned that the carbohydrates are the obvious and fruitful cause of derangements of digestion that are clinically determinable, especially diarrhea and flatulence." Meanwhile, the interest shown by Drs. Halt and Herder had been transmitted to Dr. Holt's two younger assistants at the Vanderbilt Clinic, Dr. John Howland and Dr. Sidney V. Haas. In 1921, Howland, in his presidential address before the American Pediatric Society, read a paper on prolonged intolerance to carbohydrate. Although Howland did not use the term celiac disease, the condition was still known by a great variety of names. He described his cases vividly. There are loose stools from time to time with loss of weight. The condition improves between the attacks somewhat, but sooner or later a relapse occurs and there is a renewed loss of weight. The relapses are increasingly severe. Eventually, there is a condition of marked malnutrition in a peevish, fretful, but often precocious child. The abdomen is distended, at first intermittently, and then almost constantly. The stools are never normal. Even between attacks of diarrhea they are large, light gray in color, often frothy, and usually very foul. Growth suffers in proportion to the length of time that the symptoms persist, and many children are greatly below the average in the celiac STOI-35 height. From clinical experience, it has been found that of all the elements of food, carbohydrates is the one which must be excluded rigorously, that with this greatly reduced, the protein and fat are almost always well digested, even though the absorption of fat may not be as satisfactory as in health. Dr. Howland warned that after initial improvement occurs with the elimination of carbohydrates, the stage where carbohydrates are added is the most difficult. He explained that although the initial phase may be time-consuming, these patients well repay the efforts expended on them. They do not remain semi-invalids, many become vigorous and strong, some even with no trace of dietary idiosyncrasies. Halfway measures are quite unavailing and cause only loss of time. Other doctors confirmed Howland's treatment as achieving greater success than any previous one, but the need for some tolerable carbohydrate in the celiac diet remained. Despite the remarkable success of Dr. Howland's treatment with emphasis on carbohydrate restriction, other doctors, distracted by the occurrence of fatty stools, continued to believe that dietary fats were at fault. But although there was some confusion resulting from this belief, there was a steadily increasing recognition of the primary role of disordered carbohydrate metabolism and digestion in causing celiac disease. Dr. Sidney Valentine Haas, working with Dr. Howland, was in full agreement with Dr. Howland's work but was interested in learning if some form of carbohydrate could be added to the diet to hasten recovery and provide a more varied and nutritious diet. He had noted reports throughout the years whereby children with severe diarrhea had done very well on banana flour, made of 70% ripe banana, and plantain meal. It was at the home for Hebrew infants that Dr. Haas first experimented with banana feeding. 7 One of his patients was an infant who had difficulty in eating. The baby refused all food. Dr. Haas offered the baby a banana. At that time, banana was considered completely indigestible by a sick child. Everybody was horrified at the 36 chapter 6 idea of feeding it to an infant, everybody that is, except the infant, who not only took it but asked for more. He was given more and thus Dr. Haas discovered the banana could be well tolerated. He then decided to experiment with the banana, as the sought-after carbohydrate source, in the dietary treatment for celiac. He soon discovered that celiacs could tolerate this carbohydrate and, more than that, the banana could be fed in large quantities with beneficial effect. He further experimented with carbohydrate-containing fruits and some vegetables and found that they, too, could be tolerated and the celiac could regain health on a far more varied diet than just protein and fat. During the next few years, Dr. Haas treated over 600 cases of celiac disease with his specific carbohydrate diet, maintaining his patients on it for at least 12 months, and found that prognosis of celiac disease was excellent. There is complete recovery with no relapses, no deaths, no crisis, no pulmonary involvement and no stunting of growth. LLY 1949, Dr. Sidney Haas's reputation was known throughout the world, and on April 5 of that year, more than 100 leading physicians met at the New York Academy of Medicine to pay him tribute. The New York Times reported Todke, on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of his entrance into the medical profession, one of America's great pediatricians, Dr. Sidney Haas, is being honored for his pioneer work in the field at pediatrics. Among Dr. Haas's most important accomplishments was in the treatment of celiac disease, a digestive disturbance in which the child is intolerant of starchy food, and which was generally fatal at the time of his original work. Following his discovery that the carbohydrates in bananas could be tolerated by celiac patients, Dr. Haas developed an accepted routine therapy which laid the basis for later research and basic treatment in this field. Low in 1951, Dr. Haas, together with his son, Dr. Merrill P. Haas, published The Management of Celiac Disease, the most comprehensive medical text that had ever been written on the celiac story. 37 Celiac disease. With 670 references to published reports, the book described celiac disease more completely than had even been done before. The doctors Haas presented their success with the specific carbohydrate diet and offered their hypothesis in the last chapter of their book as to why the diet was effective. After decades of searching, it appeared that not only was an effective and lasting dietary treatment found, but that the Haas-specific carbohydrate diet was accepted by medical colleagues throughout the world as a cure for celiac disease. But as Michael Crichton has written, the battle continued. Within 1 year after the publication of the Dr. Haas's book, a singular report appeared in the English medical journal, Lancet. 12. A group of 6 faculty members of the Departments of Pharmacology and of Pediatrics and Child Health of the University of Birmingham, after testing only 10 children, decided that it was not the starch, carbohydrate, in the grains that so many had reported as being deleterious, but it was the protein, gluten, in wheat and rye flour that was causing celiac symptoms. Gluten, like all proteins, it is composed of hundreds of building blocks called amino acids which are linked together to form the protein molecule. In most people, the gluten molecule is broken down by digestive enzymes in the small intestine, and the simple amino acids of which gluten is composed are absorbed by the intestinal absorptive cells to provide nutrition for the rest of the body. L3. It is believed that this is not the case in celiac disease and that the gluten remains undigested. The Lancet report concluded, gastrointestinal function was investigated in 10 children with celiac disease. The changes were very similar to those in adult idiopathic steatohepatitis. The removal of wheat the diet resulted in rapid improvement, both clinical and biochemical, and deteriorates followed by reintroduction into the diet of wheat flour or wheat gluten, but wheat starch had no harmful effect. They contradicted all previous work by stating that there was no need to restrict carbohydrates and, therefore, 38 Chapter 6 an unlimited choice of food could be ingested, provided that wheat and rye gluten were excluded. Further, a high-caloric diet may be given throughout with biscuits made from corn flour, soya flour, or wheat starch instead of wheat flour. They maintained that it was not the starch in grains that was the culprit but it was the protein gluten, and that when the gluten was washed out of the flour, the remaining starch was perfectly fine. And overnight, the hypothesis gained ready acceptance. No need now for doctors to worry about adhering to a diet which eliminated specific carbohydrates found in many foods. Only one dietary exclusion would have to be made, and that was the gluten in wheat and rye flour. It simplified the difficult problem of keeping people on a more restricted diet. No need to delve into food biochemistry and ask why gluten-containing foods such as corn would be permissible. It was to be a black and white remedy with no shades of gray. Despite extensive research by many investigators, there is as yet no certainty about the precise nature of the gluten which is causing injury to the intestinal cells. During the 19,701s, as newer techniques permitted researchers to further subdivide the large gluten molecule into smaller fractions, it was found that the alpha-gliadine fraction possessed toxic properties which appeared to injure intestinal cells of the true celiacs. 15 But there still remain unanswered questions about this smaller alpha-gliadine protein fraction. 1. Is there a genetic lack of the digestive enzymes which would normally split these gliadine molecules into their single amino acids, thereby preventing their harmful effects? 2. Is there a weakness in the membranes of the intestinal cells which permits the intact, undigested gliadine molecules to penetrate the intestinal cells and, once inside, poison the cells? 3. Do the gliadine molecules bind to the surface of the intestinal cells and, thereby, immobilize the cells and destroy them? The most popular theory is that the gliadine fraction, by penetrating the intestinal cell membrane, reaches the underlying layer of white blood cells and causes an immune the celiac story 39 response. The products of the immune response, including antibodies, injure the intestinal cells and cause them to change their shape and to function abnormally. More recent findings have implicated a carbohydrate molecule attached to the gliadine molecule as the toxic compound. When the carbohydrate is removed, the gliadine molecule is no longer injurious to the intestinal E1ls. Very recent research has cast more light on the gluten-celiac hypothesis and highlights the interaction between the starch and protein components of flour milled from grains. Almost all normal people fail to absorb a large amount of the starch of wheat flour. IVHIS incomplete absorption of starch results in an increase in intestinal fermentation and the production of intestinal gas. In an effort to discover why wheat starch is not completely digested by many people, investigations were conducted relating to the physical structure of wheat flour. It was found that wheat flour is composed of granules containing a starch core surrounded by a network of gluten protein. This protein-starch complex can be separated by a manufacturing process whereby most of the gluten is removed. The remaining flour is sold as low-gluten flour, and when it is substituted for regular wheat flour, there is improvement in starch digestion and absorption. Surprisingly, when the low-gluten flour is baked into bread together with the separated gluten, starch malabsorption does not occur in spite of the fact that the same amount of gluten is present in the baked product as was present in the whole grain before gluten extraction. Since absorption of the wheat starch is complete, there is no resulting fermentation and intestinal gas. This indicates that it is not the gluten alone which results in intestinal symptoms. The investigators feel that it is the interaction between the starch and the gluten which results in the incomplete digestion and incomplete absorption of starch and which causes intestinal gas, abdominal discomfort, and diarrhea. They speculate that the gluten extraction process alters or exposes the starch core, thereby making the starch more vulnerable to pancreatic digestive enzyme. This 40 Chapter 6 intriguing interaction between the starch and protein of grains will, undoubtedly, be the basis for much future research and may be shown to have some bearing on those with celiac disease. Some patients showed remarkable clinical improvement in their general well-being after following a gluten-free diet. However, biopsy samples, as viewed under the microscope, showed intestinal cells that were still markedly abnormal. 20 Additionally, some patients who started eating gluten suffered no ill effects at one time but became extremely ill at other times. Thus, not only do different celiac patients vary in their response to a gluten-free diet, but the same patient may vary from time to time. 21 When the common relapse occurs, the patient is most often told that she must have inadvertently ingested gluten, and it is common for patients to become so nervous about making a mistake that they assume that anything on a product that begins with glut must be gluten, glutamic acid, glutamine, monosodium glutamate, etc. or that gluten had somehow crept into the food in spite of the fact that it did not appear on the label. It soon became apparent that grains which contained proteins other than gluten were having deleterious effects on the digestive tract. Some patients suffered relapses and exhibited damaged intestinal cells, microscopically, upon and barley were found to conating soy products. Oats contain gluten-like proteins which offended many celiac sufferers. Additional reports implicated rice as being harmful to intestinal cell but the diet to manage celiac had been simplified and there now remained the problem of simplifying the diagnosis. The new diagnostic tool, the intestinal biopsy instrument, would be used to identify celiac. In spite of the symptoms the patient manifested, the patient would not be diagnosed as a true celiac until other criteria are met. A series of intestinal biopsies would be done. One tissue sample would be taken from the small intestine before gluten was removed from the diet, a second sample would be taken after the patient had been on a gluten-free diet. The celiac story 41 biopsy samples would have to reflect the changes in the diet. When viewed under the microscope, the intestinal surface would have to appear flattened or blunted while the patient ingested gluten. After gluten withdrawal, the intestinal surface would have to revert to its normal architecture of hills and valleys. If a patient fulfilled this established criteria, his condition would then be given the name, gluten-induced enteropathy celiac disease. Thus, only a small number of persons exhibiting the clinical symptoms of malabsorption including diarrhea, bloated belly, and failure to thrive could now be classified as celiacs. The others, an even larger group, suffering with the same symptoms, but who did not pass the required test using the intestinal biopsy criteria, would be suffering from diarrhea from an unknown cause, steatorrhea, fat in the stool, malabsorption, sprue, etc. Therefore, if a physician applied the strict definition for diagnosing celiac disease, the number of true celiacs would remain very small while there would remain a large group of patients with assorted diagnoses or no diagnosis of any kind. 15 In a recent review of celiac disease, the gastroenterologist writing the article referred to this method of diagnosis as the current gold standard for diagnosis. However, this method of diagnosis has been seriously questioned by a number of specialists. The flattened or blunted intestinal surface has been reported in innumerable disease states: infectious hepatitis, ulcerative colitis, parasitic infections of the intestine including various types of worms and one-celled parasites, quasi-orchoroid protein intolerance, intolerance to cow's milk protein, intractable diarrhea of infancy, Crohn's disease 2 and bacterial overgrowth of the small intestine. Bacterial overgrowth of the small intestine has also resulted in patchy broadening and flattening of the small intestinal surface. Just about all conditions associated with diarrhea seem to result in the same appearance of the small intestine as is seen in the so-called true celiac. And in spite of increasing numbers of sophisticated tests developed to confirm the diagnosis of celiac including antibody tests, genetic testing involving HLA-124S2542 Chapter 6, histocompatibility antigens, markers, and twin studies, there appear to be more exceptions to the rule than those who follow the rule. The reality is that thousands of patients are suffering and have never been given a diagnosis other than to see a psychiatrist, and thousands of patients are following gluten-free diets and are getting minimal relief, if any. The most disquieting development in the gluten-celiac picture is the fact that celiacs, whether or not they respond favorably or unfavorably to gluten withdrawal, exhibit other serious intestinal problems which a gluten-free diet does not appear to be effective in preventing. It seems, therefore, that something other than the protein, gluten, is involved in the underlying cause of the disorder. Some investigators have always maintained that an inability to digest disaccharides induces the sensitivity to gluten. 34 But even were the disaccharides not the underlying cause of gluten intolerance, these double sugars should not be included in the diet of celiacs. The flattened intestinal absorptive cells have lost their ability to perform the last step in digestion, which is to split disaccharides. Many researchers have confirmed the fact that in celiac patients, ability to digest disaccharides, especially lactose, is severely limited. 2 G36VO include disaccharides and certain starches in the diet of those exhibiting a flattened intestinal surface is to demand the impossible of these digestive and absorptive cells and to add to the existing problems. 39 The following is part of an unsolicited letter sent to this writer and is, unfortunately, reported all too frequently. After years of mysterious symptoms, dozens of doctors, Nrelling and Oban humiliating tests and general misery, no one could decide what was wrong with me. I discovered that because my two sisters and my daughter had been diagnosed as celiacs that I, too, should go on the gluten-free diet. Unfortunately for both my daughter, another sister, and I, the gluten-free diet did not work. Some symptoms were arrested but none of us were ensvengan just weren't absorbing food. We eventually found the Specific Carbohydrate Diet and it has been a godsend. I have never been healthier. My the celiac story 43. Heck once a sick and, a fine wing, withdrawn child with thin hair and dark circles under her ges is outgoing red-cheeked and happy. Everyone has nuggied her thick, shiny hail. In fact she ran a marathon this year and placed 15th out of 79 children. Last year she ran the same race, before the diet, and placed 53rd, mved weepy and slept all the way home in the car. I have been on the Specific Carbohydrate Diet for less than a year and shy to have a way to go but my LE has changed drastically and in this short time. Now I am active and pursuing my art interests, something I always had inside me, but didn't have the energy or drive to tackle. The Specific Carbohydrate Diet has been shown to completely cure most cases of celiac disease if followed for at least 1 year. It is truly a gluten-free diet, eliminating all grains which contain gluten or gluten-like proteins while also recognizing the limitations of the injured intestinal surface. For those people who are not satisfied with their progress on the gluten-free diet, the Specific Carbohydrate Diet offers them the opportunity to become healthy. Chapter 7 The Brain Connection. The search for the cause of schizophrenia and other serious neurological disorders, going back as far as the early 1900s, has led many investigators into the murky depths of the gastrointestinal tract. Although far removed anatomically from the brain, the intestine continues, now as it did then, to demand attention from the many researchers searching for the origin of neurological disorders. Repeatedly, the medical literature reports that allergists, gastrointestinal specialists, and psychiatrists have found that certain types of food, impaired digestion, and faulty absorption or ingestion of vitamins and minerals affect the function of the nervous system including the brain. Celiac specialists, as early as 1908, had begun reporting evidence that some patients who suffered extended periods of diarrhea and malabsorption were also showing degeneration of the brain, spinal cord, and other groups of nervous tissue. This deterioration of the nervous system in celiac disease was attributed to the patient's inability to absorb essential nutrients, including vitamins and minerals, due to injuries to the intestinal tract accompanying the disease. Further advances were made in biochemistry and cellular biology. Numerous scientific papers appeared showing, in great detail, the devastating effects of lack of certain vitamins and minerals on the brain and other nerve centers. Forms of paralysis 1 and types. Throughout the BDY, some of psychiatric disorders 4 were shown to be the result of nutrient deprivation, which is known to be caused by malabsorption during intestinal disease. It has also been known for almost 100 years that microbial action in the 46 Chapter 7 unseen world of the intestinal tract can be a source of toxins which affect normal brain. When our younger daughter was cured of ulcerative colitis by dietary changes in the 1960s. The first symptoms to disappear were a type of seizures which occurred after she had fallen asleep. They were characterized by delirium, lasted about 1 hour and reoccurred several times weekly. Her recovery from the intestinal disease was preceded by an end to the seizures, never to return. During the 7 years of doing consultations with people diagnosed as having Crohn's disease, colitis, and other forms of chronic diarrhea, I observed that improvement for many started with the disappearance of long-standing mental disorders including epilepsy, schizophrenia, mental confusion, poor memory, and bizarre behavior. And finally, with the distribution of my book, Food and the Gut Reaction, letters began arriving reporting this same phenomenon. Mental disorders of long standing were clearing up even before the intestinal symptoms disappeared. The medical literature abounds with published research which has attempted to explain this brain-bowel connection. The French scientist, Dr. H. Baruch, summarized 50 years of research on schizophrenia and mental disorders by stating, instead of considering these illnesses hopeless, it is preferable to consider the majority of psychoses or neuroses as reactions to biological factors which are very often digestive in origin, and psychiatry must acknowledge them. These toxic factors are disregarded far too often. 6 Baruch, as early as 1923, implicated a harmful strain of intestinal bacteria, E. coli, a normal inhabitant of the intestinal tract, as producing a toxin which exerts itself on the nervous system. This toxicity, Baruch concluded, produces a pathological sleep with delirium, resulting in psychotic-type mental confusion or schizophrenia. About this same time period, the doctors Buscino of the Neurological Clinic of the University of Naples, Italy, reported that most schizophrenics showed some form of intestinal disease whereas manic-depressive patients did not. Further, the Brain Connection 47 they found that the intestinal bacterial population of schizophrenics was abnormal. The doctors Buscino stated that, true schizophrenia, and not only some schizophrenic syndromes, appears to be the result of chronic intoxication from psychotoxic factors produced in the intestine. More recently, in the 1970s, a psychiatrist, Dr. F. C. Dohan, implicated all cereal grains and milk as being the dietary factors in this intestinal brain connection. Some investigators explain the adverse impact of these foods on mentally disturbed people as some sort of brain allergy or immune reaction, but there has been much controversy among scientists in their efforts to equate the effects of these foods with a typical allergic reaction. In 1991, Dr. J. O. Hunter presented his opinion on this controversial subject by writing that if this type of food allergy is not an immunological disease, but a disorder of bacterial fermentation in the colon, then it might be more appropriately named an enterometabolic, intestinal, disorder. Dr. C. Orion Truss, an internist, has focused on the relationship of allergy and infection. With the publication of his book, The Missing Diagnosis, he launched the concept of candidiasis, yeast infection, AS being at the root of many types of mental as well as physical disorders. 1 degree among many of his patients with innumerable symptoms, psychotic symptoms including schizophrenia and neurosis were often part of the picture. Based on the premise that the intestinal flora, yeast in particular, was in a state of imbalance, dysbiosis, he included in his treatment and cure a diet free of carbohydrates. Why? Because of all dietary components, undigested and unabsorbed carbohydrates, starch and sugar, have the greatest influence on the growth of intestinal microbes. LL in the late 1970s and through the 1980 a number of reports were published in medical journals which added fuel to the burning issue of the bowel-brain connection. Doctors reported that among patients who had undergone surgical shortening of the small intestine, a treatment for serious gastrointestinal disorders as well as obesity, thereby decreasing their ability to break down and absorb food, 48 Chapter 7 patients were presenting with unusual neurological symptom. Among the symptoms were aggressiveness, sudden disorientation, blurred vision, blunted judgment, abusive behavior, slurred speech, staggering gait, rolling of the eyeballs, confusion, and delirium. The attacks lasted between 36–80 hours. Using the most sophisticated methods of analysis, it was found that carbohydrates were not being digested or absorbed, surgery had severely limited digestive capacity, and intestinal bacteria were, therefore, flooded with a surplus of carbohydrates which were being fermented in the remaining intact, intestinal tract. As a result, a waste product of bacterial fermentation, D-lactic acid, was being produced in abnormally large amounts. 16 It is currently thought that this acid, along with other toxic products produced by intestinal microbes, is entering the brain and poisoning the brain cells. Although the many patients exhibiting these symptoms have been treated with antibiotics to kill the bacteria producing the toxins, it has been stated that D-lactic acid is more effectively managed by preventing its formation, accomplished by manipulating dietary carbohydrates. I7 It has also been noted that this same type of malabsorption and the resulting production of D-lactic acid occurs not only when there has been surgical shortening of the intestine but in other gastrointestinal disorders. As we 11.18 In addition, it is a well-known fact in veterinarian medicine that in cattle, D-lactic acidosis results from overfeeding with grain. I2 Since the publication of my first book in 1987, numerous reports from individuals with both intestinal and neurological problems have been brought to my attention. The following are only a few case histories which show the dramatic relationship between intestinal and brain function. A young woman with ulcerative colitis was reporting her symptoms to me when her mother interrupted to tell me more. Apparently, the daughter was under the care of a neurologist, as well as a gastroenterologist, because she barked like a dog in her sleep. She had been taking a schizophrenic drug for this peculiar symptom. I was curious to check on this woman's progress with the specific carbohydrate diet, the Brain Connection 49, because of similar cases that had improved. When I called the day after her next appointment with the neurologist, she told me that her EEG, brainwave test, was normal for the first time in years. Shortly thereafter she was taken off the schizophrenic drug. It took longer for her ulcerative colitis to get better, about 2 years. There have been many babies with chronic diarrhea accompanied by epileptic seizures. One baby was on commercial formula and was eating some solid foods. When his diet was changed to the specific carbohydrate diet, both diarrhea and the epileptic seizures cleared up. He continues to do well 6 years later. Another baby with seizures was being breastfed and was also eating cereal. The mother went on the specific carbohydrate diet, the baby was allowed only those foods on the diet, and the epilepsy disappeared. He has been free of seizures for 5 years. The following letter to a local newspaper further illustrates this bowel-brain connection. The letter was written in response to an earlier newspaper article relating to a young woman with Crohn's disease accompanied by mental symptoms. Upon calling the writer of this letter, other details were given. The writer's husband had spent 40 years in and out of psychiatric institutions with the diagnosis of schizophrenia which accompanied his intestinal disorder. Chapter 7 The Coburg Daily Star, November 23, 1989 Diet held cure for deadly illness. Today I read with great interest and much sadness your article on Marilyn Isaac and the mystery disease with which she battled so long and so sadly lost. My husband has sued all his life from this disease, but unlike most have found he had for his illness. Like Manan he was treated for mental disease and fluent illnesses for more than 40 years. His weight by this May had galls below 150 pounds. He had bled internally until he was too weak to move around and was vomiting continually, unable to keep food down. As his physical condition declined, his mental attitude declined as well. I am an avid reader of your paper. Sometime in early May you had a column in your paper about a book written by Elaine Gottschall B.A.M.Sc. called Food and the Gut Reaction. She was in town at one of our health food stores. I bought the book, which was available at one of bookstores. It has been a miracle. The diet is not a hard one to follow, only requiring some extra food preparation, but well worth the effort. By now, after 4 months off diet, my husband has gained 40 pounds and is mentally well enough to drive his car, something he hasn't been able to do in years. He has been able to do all his own work and requires no help to care for me. One have been in bed for quite some years. I think, you would use your article on this diet again, it mzght bring the worth at this diet to some other young individual. I thank you for taking the time to read this letter and maybe he at others. Bet at Elder Chapter 8 The Autism Connection. In many autistic children, bacterial and fungal overgrowths are etiologically significant in the cascade of events that result in autism or one of the other autism spectrum disorders. By Jacqueline McCandless in Children with Starving Brains. A sensible and harmless form of WARE in the aberrant population of intestinal microbes is to manipulate their energy good supply through diet. By depriving intestinal microbes of their energy source, their numbers gradually decrease along with the products they produce. By Elaine Gottschall in Breaking the Vicious Cycle. Janie played with the doll for the first time ever today. I almost fainted. She initiated a hug and kiss for the first time ever in her 4 years of LFE. From mom of Janie with Down syndrome, autism, and gastrointestinal issues after a short time on the specific carbohydrate diet. The specific carbohydrate diet has entered the world of autism through the back door one, the intestinal tract. And what may have first appeared to be the back door, via the digestive system, is rapidly becoming one of the most scientifically researched areas in determining what may be one of the underlying causes of many autism spectrum disorders. Because the specific carbohydrate diet's goal is to heal the 52 Chapter 8 intestinal tract and to rid it of bacterial and fungal overgrowth, it is proving to be a very successful dietary intervention in treating many autistic children and leading them back to a life of normalcy. This chapter will review some of the research dealing with the gut-brain axis in child developmental disorders. It will point out how dietary intervention with the specific carbohydrate diet addresses and often overcomes conditions thought to be at the root of autism spectrum disorders as well as some cases of epilepsy and attention deficit disorder, AD. Chapter 7, The Brain Connection, highlights the research of many years in which it had been shown that various neurological problems originate in the digestive system. And when the number of autistic children soared within the last 2 decades, attention has again been directed to the gastrointestinal tract. Parents of autistic children have always known that, among their children's symptoms, there exist symptoms of chronic constipation, periods of diarrhea, and abdominal pain. But until recently, the parents' reports were treated as of no consequence. Now, fortunately, attention is being focused on these physical symptoms as well as on behavior, and many gastroenterologists are in agreement that these children are ill and are in distress and pain, and not just neurologically dysfunctional. To some physicians, recognizing that diet was playing a part in causing the intestinal symptoms, focused their attention on treating these gastrointestinal symptoms as allergies and/or sensitivities. When testing these patients, they found evidence of sensitivities to various food components, mainly the gluten of grains and various components of dairy products. The behavior of many autistic children, although not all, showed improvement with the removal of these foods from their diet, but, unfortunately, although behavior often improved, intestinal function did not. It was not unusual for the author to receive letters from parents as follows: "My son is almost 6 years old and has autism. He was gluten/casein GE for 2 years, and while, during the Autism Connection 53 first 6 months I thought I saw improvement in his exhibiting less stern me, repeating the same action over and over again, his stimming returned. Even while on this diet, he still had constant stomach problems, being hospitalized 4 times for throwing up and dehydration. One time he sued with a bowel obstruction, the other times they weren't sure what brought on his violent vomiting attacks. No doctor even bothered to do a colonoscope. I have mentioned to our doctor for years that he seems to be addicted to potato sphancias, ketchup, and waffles. When I learned of the specific carbohydrate diet, it addressed this carbohydrate addiction, and I intend starting this diet promptly." And another letter from Patricia: "Meanwhile, my younger child 3 health wash failing, he was on a strict gluten-free diet because of celiac disem, but it wasn't helping. He wash ghost white and rail thin, with little energy and with chronic diarrhea and black cycles under his eyes. Deep down, I worried he was dying. The team at pediatric specialists we were seeing had no clue how to make my little boy healthy, nor did my daughter 3 alternative Dan, Fleeto awesome now, physician. Fortunately for us, this was August. And every doctor treating my son was on vacation. In desperation, I picked up a book called Breaking the Vicious Cycle, Intestinal Health Through Diet by Elaine Gottschall, A stranger had mailed this book to me 2 months earlier after meeting my mother and hearing about my son's deteriorating health. The book explained why my son wasn't living on the regular celiac diet. His intestines were so damaged he couldn't digest any grains, or complex carbohydrates. The next day, he started the so-called Specific Carbohydrate Diet, SCD, described in this book. His stools became normal, and he started growing and gaining weight. He now a strong healthy 7-year-old. 54 Chapter 8 What about my daughter? She had no obvious digestion troubles, but she did have autism and a recently discovered yeast overgrowth. One British researcher found a link between the MMR shot, intestinal problems, and autism. Wouldn't a diet that promised to heal her intestines and help with yeast overgrowth be her best shot at normal LE? We put Mana on a dairy-at-EE version of the SCD. She had a turn 3 LE yeast DIOJ that lasted a week even though she was taking Nistadin, a popular anti-Jafern gall drug. But once she recovered at the diox about a week late 6 we were confident she'd summitki grow into an independent adult, thanks to this remarkable diet. Her remaining speech peculiarities, such as mixing up the order FC word in a sentence, disappeared. Her WE contact became normal. By the time she was 4-1/2, 1 year after her diagnosis, no one would guess she was ever autistic. These parents' reports are echoed throughout the autistic community. Although various dietary proteins appear to aggravate behavioral symptoms, their removal is not addressing the gastrointestinal problems. In addition, it becomes increasingly apparent that as a few dietary proteins are removed, more and more must be taken out of the diet to hopefully achieve and sustain progress until these children have little to eat in the way of nutritious food. Parents continuously complain of their children's addiction to carbohydrates. Dr. J. Zero Hunter in 1991 described this dilemma of treating patients with gastrointestinal symptoms as food allergies or sensitivities. He stated that patients who exhibit sensitivities do not follow classical type I allergic reaction. If these intolerances are not allergies, then they may be a disorder of bacterial fermentation in the colon, and the disorders might be more appropriately named enterometabolic, intestinal, disorders. 3. The specific carbohydrate diet approaches these gastrointestinal challenges in autism as it has been successfully doing for inflammatory bowel disease, as a disorder of bacterial the Autism Connection 55 fermentation and the ensuing problems which occur because of bacterial fermentation. These problems resulting from bacterial fermentation are, 1. Production of excess amounts of short-chain volatile fatty acids, organic acids, 2. Lowering of the pH of the blood as these acids are absorbed, 3. Overgrowth of bacteria as the undigested carbohydrates provide food for bacterial proliferation, 4. Mutation of some bacteria such as E. coli because of the change in pH in their colonic environment, and 5. Excess toxin production caused by the overgrowth of some pathological bacteria. Bacterial fermentation occurs when undigested carbohydrates escape digestion and absorption and end up in the lower parts of the small intestine and colon. Unlike diets that eliminate only certain proteins, based on tests showing sensitivities to proteins, and that allow unlimited intake of starches and sugars, the specific carbohydrate diet, SCD, is designed to nourish the child optimally and to minimize bacterial fermentation. Coleman and Blass in 1985 in the Journal of Developmental Disorders reported the first evidence that autism might be linked to carbohydrate metabolism, digestion. These researchers reported that the syndrome of D-lactic acidosis was found to be present in autistic children. Their work was based on reports of the 1970s and 1980s showing that undigested carbohydrates were being changed by bacterial action in the intestine to a substance, D-lactic acid. High amounts of D-lactic acid in the bloodstream have been found to cause bizarre behavioral symptoms. This book discusses earlier research relating to D-lactic acidosis in Chapter 7, The Brain Connection. 5, 6, 7, 8. 9. There are two approaches to treating this abnormal production of D-lactic acid. 1. Use of antibiotics to kill the bacteria producing the substance, a method often used medically, and 2. Decreasing the amount of fermentable carbohydrates upon which bacteria feed in order to produce D-lactic acid. Since antibiotic therapy often is accompanied by other side effects, it seems reasonable to suggest Dietary 56 Chapter 8 changes to accomplish the same thing, or ASA support for medical intervention with antibiotics. The year 2000 yielded landmark research in linking autism to the gastrointestinal tract. It was reported that among 385 children on the autism spectrum, significant gastrointestinal symptoms occurred in 46% compared with only 10% of almost 100 children without autism, confirming what parents already knew. 12 A flurry of remarkable scientific papers appeared, first, in the British Medical Journal, Lancet 13, and then in the American Journal of Gastroenterology, Wakefield, I4, demonstrating conclusively that serious intestinal pathology was found in more than half of autistic patients. These intestinal problems ranged from moderate to severe, including esophagitis, gastritis, and enterocolitis, along with the presence of lymphoid nodular hyperplasia. Some of these intestinal pathologies resembled Crohn's disease as well as ulcerative colitis. As would be expected, from previous research done on intestinal problems, see pages 22 to 24, it was also found by Horvath et al. 5, that there was low carbohydrate digestive enzyme activity. See diagrams of injured microvilli in the chapter on carbohydrate digestion, although the pancreatic function was normal. Horvath's report concluded by saying unrecognized gastrointestinal disorders, especially reflux esophagitis and disaccharide malabsorption, may contribute to the behavioral problems of the nonverbal autistic patients. Additional reports from findings at Harvard Massachusetts General Hospital conclusively showed that carbohydrate digestion is being hampered at the locus of the intestinal absorptive cell. 16 Initial autism research findings at Harvard Massachusetts General, testing 400 autistic children found that, 1. Lactase deficiency was found in 55% of ASD children tested, 2. Combined deficiency of disaccharidase enzymes was found in 15%, and 3. Enzyme assays correlate well with hydrogen breath tests. The hydrogen breath test measures the amount of hydrogen gas given off when intestinal microbes ferment unabsorbed carbohydrates. The Autism Connection 57. This current work, on the decrease in the action of disaccharidase enzymes, leading to malabsorption, forms the basis for therapy of the specific carbohydrate diet. Its goal is to keep disaccharide ingestion to a minimum by avoiding lactose, sucrose, maltose, and isomaltose, remnants of starch digestion, and to provide a nutritious, healing diet without these double sugars. It deprives the microbial world of the intestine from a surplus of fermentable carbohydrates. It is well known that compounds arising in the intestinal tract can enter the bloodstream and cross the blood-brain barrier. Gastroenterologists have been aware of this in treating the neurological effects of liver disease, hepatic encephalopathy. Reports have been published on how these toxins from the intestinal tract affect neurotransmitter research by E.R. Boldulg, in Substances in the Brain. An effort to correlate autism behavioral symptoms to the intestinal tract, investigated how the toxin of one bacterium, Clostridium tetani, could find its way from the intestinal tract to the central nervous system via the vagus nerve. But there is still disagreement among researchers as to what constitutes the toxins from the gastrointestinal tract and what their origins are. Again, are they derived from proteins or are they products of intestinal bacterial action? This question was addressed in an outstanding research paper published in Neuropsychobiology in 2002 and authored by Dr. Harumi Jinushi et al. 1.20. Dr. Jinushi's group were the first to explain how bacterial toxins from the intestine can result in sensitivities to certain dietary proteins, and casts light on the conundrum of which comes first, allergia cell sensitivities, which might lead to intestinal inflammation, or bacterial and yeast overgrowth, infections, which can lead to sensitivities to certain dietary proteins. The question can be viewed as: can the body's innate immune system, by reacting to the toxins of certain bacterial cell walls, cause the sensitivities to proteins such as casein and gluten? The authors suggest that the root cause of the food protein sensitivity may be an underlying sensitivity to endotoxin, which arises from the surfaces of gram-negative bacteria in the gut. 58 Chapter 8 Flora, the lipopolysaccharide component of the cell wall of certain bacteria present in the intestines. To this response, to an endotoxin of intestinal bacterial cells, is considered an innate immune response, an ancient form of defense coded in the genes as an inherited trait. This innate immune response to the bacterial toxin could stimulate the production of antibodies and cytokines, initiators of an inflammatory response, part of an adaptive immune response. Point 22 Dr. Giannusci's research is an attempt to answer the question of why there is gastrointestinal pathology in children exhibiting autism spectrum disorders, and invites the research community to explore dietary intervention in order to ameliorate the behavioral symptoms of autism. It is the hope of the author that this book will be of help to the research community in understanding how the molecular components of commonly eaten foods affect this problem, and how changing the child's diet can, indeed, break the vicious cycle. The Autism Connection. Important note to parents of autistic children: when implementing the specific carbohydrate diet, it is important to remember that during the first week to 10 days, profound changes are occurring in the digestive tract. The hundreds of different families of microorganisms are changing their metabolic functions due to the lack of nutrients to which they have been accustomed and of which they are now being deprived. Some children may do well even during the first week, but others will go through a period of adjustment which some refer to as detoxification. It will be helpful during this period to find support from the many other parents who have been through this change. Going to the following websites can give you this support. It is especially important that you read the information on these websites relating to the introduction of dairy products. A decision can then be made if the specific carbohydrate diet should be implemented with or without dairy. The only official SCD website. 60 Chapter 8 Other websites, although not officially SCD, can be of great support to parents who are just starting the SCD commitment. Remember, advice from support groups differ and is subjective. www.breakingtheviciouscycle.info is the only official website and the most authoritative source of information. There is no specified schedule for introducing foods with the exception of homemade yogurt. Some people may appreciate suggested guidelines, but they are not generally required. The basic rules given in chapters 9 and 10 are usually sufficient. For example, fruits, other than banana, should be peeled and cooked well. The order for introducing them and some of the vegetables varies with each individual. Going slowly and carefully is best determined by an individual's reactions. This the sensible approach endorsed by the author. Websites which offer prepared SCD foods must be used with caution. Fruit bars, candy bars, juice extracts, etc. are rarely 100% SCD legal. Often, it is impossible to find out what the manufacturers of these products are doing. Also, methods and formulas can be changed without notice. It is best to prepare all foods in the home. Hiring a responsible person to come into your home once a week to bake and freeze entrees and baked goods is a good option to relieve the burden of work at the start. Many SCD foods such as ketchup and mayonnaise, baked goods, and treats, can be made in a few hours and will last through the week. Larger quantities of many items can be frozen in small individual portions. Chapter 9 Introducing the Diet. One basic principle of the diet must be firmly established and persistently repeated: no food should be ingested that contains carbohydrates other than those found in fruits, honey, properly prepared yogurt, and those vegetables and nuts listed. While this principle may be clearly understood, it is sometimes difficult in practice to recognize the existence of carbohydrates in various foods. Small quantities of carbohydrates other than those designated often creep into the diet unless the strictest attention is paid to every item of food. Reading labels, although a good policy, is inadequate for those on the specific carbohydrate diet, since one ingredient sometimes has numerous names and may not be easily recognized as a forbidden carbohydrate. Many cans, jars, bottles, and packages do not list all ingredients because of different labeling laws in different parts of the country. It is recommended that nothing be eaten other than those foods listed in Chapter 10, the Specific Carbohydrate Diet. Because fruits and raw vegetables have qualities which tend to make them laxative, they must be used with care when diarrhea is still active. Although all fruits, all raw vegetables, and as much honey as desired may be used when the diarrhea has cleared, it is best to eliminate them until that time. When fruits are introduced, after a week or two, they should be ripe, peeled, and cooked. Raw fruits should not be introduced until diarrhea is under control. Raw vegetables such as salad greens, carrots and celery sticks, cucumbers, and onions also should not be introduced until diarrhea is under control. 62 Chapter 9 Ripe, mashed banana is one of the uncooked fruits which may be tried first. Start cautiously with about 1/4 banana the first day. Only fully ripe bananas with no trace of green at the tips, the skin well speckled with brown, and the edible portion soft enough to mash easily should be used. Most of the carbohydrate in the unripe banana is in the form of starch which is converted, in the process of ripening, to monosaccharide sugars which are easily absorbable by those with malabsorption problems. Most canned fruits, or fruit packed in jars, are forbidden because of the added sugar. If cooked fruits are desired, they may be prepared at home with saccharin or honey. Artificial sweeteners other than saccharin should be avoided. It is interesting to note that saccharin has been vindicated as far as bladder cancer is concerned. Low-calorie diet foods often contain sorbitol or xylitol as sweeteners. Occasionally low-calorie diet chewing gum or candy containing these sweeteners may be used. However, excessive use of these products can cause diarrhea and belating. The specific carbohydrate diet includes dairy products, although fluid milk and some commercial products are eliminated. A list of the many cheeses which are allowed can be found in the appendix along with those cheeses which are not permitted. Homemade yogurt, prepared according to instructions found in the recipe section, is permitted. It is very important that the yogurt instructions be followed precisely so that virtually none of its lactose remains. This is particularly true for the length of fermentation, a minimum of 24 hours is required. Another dairy product which should be included is dry curd cottage cheese. Every effort should be made to obtain this high-protein, sugar-free cheese for which the dairyman in your local market should help you find a source. It is not acceptable if it has any form of added milk or cream. Dry curd cottage cheese is a very important part of the diet since it may be creamed with homemade yogurt and substituted for regular cottage cheese. It may be note, see Appendix G or sources QFDY curd cottage cheese. In Androduahite diet 63 used as a base for pancakes and cheesecake, and it may be used for short periods as an infant formula, see gourmet section. Warning, some dairies are calling a type of cottage cheese, with added milk products, uncreamed since there is very little fat, cream, in the milk which has been added. This type of cottage cheese is not permitted. It is quite moist, contains a considerable amount of lactose, and should immediately be recognized as not being a dry curd. It is not advisable to use lactose hydrolyzed milk, LHM, either prepared in the home or as a commercially available product at the beginning of the dietary regimen. Although lactose hydrolyzed milk decreases fermentation in the intestine, its effect on the liver of those with chronic intestinal disorders has yet to be investigated. Additional research should be conducted to determine the speed with which the sugars of LHM milk reach the liver. Only then will it be known if the blood galactose, one of the sugars in LHM, stays within normal levels or rises to high. 3 Once the individual makes considerable progress and is on the road to recovery, small amounts of LHM may be used in tea, coffee, and in cooking. When brisk diarrhea is no longer present, egg may be added to the diet. When bowel movements are formed and occur no more than 2 or 3 times daily, cooked vegetables may be added to the diet cautiously, one at a time, with a sufficient period between each new introduction to determine its effect. In some instances diarrhea occurs when vegetables or fruits are given, in which case their use must be postponed. In general, squash, tomato, string beans, and carrots, all in cooked form, are well tolerated. Canned vegetables, or vegetables packed in jars, are not permitted because many have added sugar or starch which the labels often do not indicate. Potatoes and yams are not permitted. Fats in association with meats, in butter, cheese, and in homemade yogurt are well tolerated. It is usually not necessary to use skim or 2% milk unless one is eliminating 64 Chapter 9 fats in order to lose weight or because of some other health problem. The specific carbohydrate diet is highly nutritious and, depending on the choice of foods, is well balanced. Every effort should be made to round out the diet by eating sensibly and not, for example, consuming large quantities of meat or more than 4 muffins each day to the exclusion of fauteur food. The diet should be discussed with your physician. Medication should continue as the physician has instructed. As progress is made, the physician, undoubtedly, will reduce medication gradually. Warning: there are very specific procedures by which certain medications are reduced and it can be dangerous to discontinue their use improperly. Always seek medical advice in reducing medication. As is advisable for all people, a daily diet should consist of a variety of foods, vegetables, fruits, cheeses, nuts, and some animal products. However, if one desires a diet without animal products, it is possible to eliminate them. The many essential nutrients which one gives up when on a strict vegetarian diet must be considered. It is beyond the scope of this book to include lists of foods which are rich in iron and Biz, two nutrients which are difficult to get in a strict vegetarian diet, and it is the responsibility of those who choose vegetarianism to see that other foods replace the nutrients given up when one eliminates animal products. Since soy products, including tofu, are not permitted on this diet, it will be very difficult, but possible, for a strict vegetarian to obtain sufficient nutrients and calories. Most people with chronic intestinal disorders also suffer from malabsorption and, consequently, are malnourished. It is advisable that they add a vitamin supplement that specifically states that it is free of sugar, starch, and yeast, see appendix. It may be necessary to write to the company manufacturing the vitamin to be sure of the ingredients. Any supplement such as bee pollen or herbs must be carefully checked since many companies have used whey, 70% lactose, sugars, or starches as fillers and binding substances. Introduce the diet 65 in the winter. In northern climates, vitamin D should be taken in combination with vitamin A as cod liver or halibut oil, 400 IU vitamin D and 5000 IU vitamin A. For people who cannot tolerate the oils, even in capsule form, there are excellent substitutes in the form of water-soluble vitamins A and D. The malabsorption of vitamin B12 is very often a part of chronic intestinal disorders and a special effort should be made, often by injections by the physician, to bring B12 levels up to high normal. There is some evidence that low levels, although they fall within the normal range, are not ideal for optimal health. The B-complex vitamins, Bl, B2, niacinamide, B6, pantothenic acid, folic acid, biotin, and Bl2 may be taken as a supplement, all in one tablet. Too much folic acid should be avoided. The amount taken should range from about 0.1 to 0.8 mg folic acid and B12 work in unison in the cells of the body, and it is important not to take more than 0.4 mg folic acid unless one is positive that Bl2 levels are in the high normal range, only then may one take up to 0.8 mg. Any woman with an intestinal disorder who is on the contraceptive pill must very seriously consider vitamin supplementation, especially of the B-complex family of vitamins, some of which are depleted by birth control medication. Since vitamin C is readily destroyed as a result of cooking and exposure to air, it is advisable that at least 100 mg be taken daily. If larger amounts of vitamin C are currently being taken, one may continue provided that there is no starch or sugar in the vitamin C preparation and that one is certain that the higher doses are not contributing to diarrhea. It is the belief of the author that very large doses of added vitamins are unnecessary. The diet is highly nutritious and vitamin supplements are used in moderation to help in the recovery. Added minerals may be in order, but it is very difficult to obtain satisfactory mineral supplements. While cells of the body require approximately 20 different minerals, most mineral supplements contain only chapter 966 about 8. Since minerals compete with each other for absorption by the intestinal cells, it is possible that by taking a few, rather than all 20, one could upset the delicate balance which, ideally, would be obtained from a nutritious diet. However, since many people with intestinal disorders are malnourished, it would be wise to check with your physician concerning the levels of the important minerals such as calcium, iron, iodine, and potassium. If mineral levels are low, they may be taken for a short time until malabsorption is corrected. Minerals, unlike vitamins, are not destroyed by air or temperature but can be lost in cooking water. Once malabsorption is corrected, the superb nutrition of the specific carbohydrate diet should supply adequate minerals. Note, maintaining proper calcium levels is extremely important, especially in babies and growing children. The infant formula in the gourmet section provides calcium but not as much as is found in fluid milk or yogurt. Therefore, if the infant formula is used for more than 2 weeks, blood calcium levels should be checked periodically by a physician who may suggest calcium supplementation. It is impossible to specify the exact amount of vitamin supplementation necessary for each individual. These formulations are offered as reasonable amounts. Please check with your doctor. For children, vitamin A, vitamin D 5000 IU and vitamin B 1.5 to 5 mg 400 IU, vitamin B2 1.5 to 5 mg, not when getting summer sun, niacinamide 10 to 20 mg, vitamin E 10 to 30 IU, pantothenic acid 2 to 5 mg, vitamin B6 2 to 5 mg, vitamin C 50 mg++ biotin 3100 UG+++, folic acid 0.1 to 0.3 mg, vitamin B12 0.6 to 3.0 UG. Introducing the diet for adults, vitamin A, vitamin D 5000 IU 400 IU, not when getting summer sun, plus vitamin E 100 IU, vitamin C 100 to 500 mg, vitamin B 10 to 15 mg 10 to 15 mg, vitamin B2 niacinamide 25 to 50 mg. Pantothenic acid 10 to 15 mg, vitamin B6 10 to 15 mg, biotin 100 to 200 UG, folic acid 0.1 to 0.5 mg, vitamin B12 100 to 200 UG. International units milligrams, micrograms +++++. The listed values are approximations. It is sometimes difficult to get all members of the B-complex family in one tablet. However, never purchase a B-complex vitamin with only Bi, Ba, and niacin. The minimal members of the B-complex family which should be included are Bi, Ba, niacin, pantothenic acid, and B6. It is wise to purchase the fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, separately from other vitamins. Unless they are in separate containers, there is a tendency to continue taking vitamin D in the summer, which should not be done unless the individual is housebound or gets very little exposure to the sun. In prescribing this diet, it is almost more important to stress what is not eaten than what is eaten. Any cereal grain is strictly and absolutely forbidden, including corn, oats, wheat, rye, rice, millet, buckwheat, or triticale in any form, whether as bread, cake, toast, zwieback, crackers, cookies, cereals, flour, or pasta, spaghetti, macaroni, or pizza. New grain substitutes are being placed on the market frequently. Some such as amaranth, quinoa, and cottonseed contain carbohydrates of unknown analysis and are not recommended while on this diet. Cereal bran, in any form, is strictly forbidden because its indigestible fiber provides an overload of carbohydrates which are fermented by intestinal bacteria. In addition, most forms of cereal bran contain large amounts of starch. White table sugar or brown sugar is 68 Chapter 9 forbidden as a sweetener or in forms such as candy, pastries, or breads. The strictness of this diet cannot be overemphasized, nor should the difficulty of adhering to it be minimized. Faithful observance requires intelligence and vigilance on the part of those taking care of the individual or on the part of the person who cooks for himself or herself. It is surprising how many times a child will manage, despite the best supervision, to get hold of forbidden food. It is equally surprising how many parents will decide, despite all warnings, that just a taste of ice cream, cookie, or candy will do no harm. Such infringements will seriously delay recovery, and it is unwise to undertake this regimen unless you are willing to follow it with phonetical adherence. Many people have approached the dietary program by planning to give it a 1-month trial. If followed carefully for only 1 month, there should be changes for the better. These improvements provide the encouragement and support needed to commit oneself for the necessary longer period. It is recommended that a chart be kept for this first month. Hang it in a convenient location, preferably the kitchen. Across the top of the sheet, list those symptoms which describe the condition, such as gas, diarrhea, or nightmares. Down the side of the sheet, number each line for the days of the month. At the end of each day, fill in the chart. For example, 4+S could be used to describe a lot of gas for that day. If there is a little less the following day, 3+S could be filled in. At the end of the month, progress can be evaluated. At this point, a personal commitment can be made to continue for a year or more, depending upon the speed of recovery. If you see no improvement after a 1-month trial, the diet will probably not work for you. It is your decision at this point to return to your old pattern of eating or to continue eating according to the outlined diet. Your decision, of course, will depend upon your overall state of well-being. At the beginning of the program, when symptoms such as diarrhea and cramping are severe, the following basic diet should be followed for about 5 days. In other introducing the diet 69 cases, 1 or 2 days on this basic diet is sufficient. The amounts of the specified foods to be eaten depend upon the appetite of the individual. There is no restriction as to quantities eaten. Breakfast: dry cottage cheese, moistened with homemade yogurt. Eggs, boiled, poached, or scrambled, * apple cider or grape juice, LH juice, IH water. See Appendix Re, juices. Homemade gelatin made with juice, unflavored gelatin, sweetener. Lunch: homemade chicken soup including broth, chicken, pureed carrots, see page 91. Broiled beef patty or broiled fish. Cheesecake, see page 130, without lemon rind and baked to custard consistency. Homemade gelatin. Dinner: variations of above if a food specified in the diet is known to cause an anaphylactic reaction, severe allergic reaction, eliminated permanently from the diet. If, in the past, an allowable food did not agree with you, eliminate it for a short time, about 1 week, and try it again in small amounts. If, after a week of eliminating it, a food continues to cause problems, do not include it in the diet. If you find it impossible to obtain the dry curd cottage cheese, substitute the cream cheese recipe, drained homemade yogurt, listed in the gourmet section. When diarrhea and cramping subside, cooked fruit, banana, and additional vegetables may be tried. If they seem to cause additional gas or diarrhea when they are added to the diet, delay their use until later. As the individual begins to feel better, the rest of the diet may be introduced. Do not use vegetables in the cabbage family until diarrhea has *. Avoid diarrhea is very severe. 70 Chapter 9 substantially subsided. Dried legumes may be added cautiously after being on the diet for about 3 months. Most cases begin to improve within 3 weeks after the dietary regimen has been started, and improvement usually continues. At about the 2nd or 3rd month, there is sometimes a relapse even when the diet has been carefully followed. This can occur if the person develops a respiratory infection or for no obvious reason. Do not allow this to discourage you. Once the individual gets over this, improvement is usually steady with minor setbacks occurring occasionally during the first year. Many cases of celiac disease, spastic colon, and diverticulitis appear to be cured by the end of a year. Other disorders such as Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis take much longer with the minimum time of 2 years on the diet. A rule of thumb is to stay on the diet for at least 1 year after the last symptom has disappeared. At that time, introduce one forbidden food at a time. It is advisable to add only one food per week, starting with very small amounts and increasing the amount as the week progresses. The next week, another food may be added. If these foods appear to be well tolerated, one may decide to return to a regular diet. If symptoms recur upon the introduction of a forbidden food, it is best to remain on the specific carbohydrate diet longer. It is hoped that no one who recovers from his or her problem by following the specific carbohydrate diet ever returns to a diet high in refined sugar and refined flours. These are lacking or low in nutrients, will not nourish the immunological system adequately, and can make the individual more susceptible to intestinal infections. We kept our child on the diet for 7 years although the symptoms had disappeared at the end of 2. We enjoyed this way of eating and preferred to be cautious. Since Dr. Haas had died 2 years after the diet was initiated, we had no way of knowing the right time to go off the diet and, realizing how highly nutritious the diet was, we decided not to risk going off it too soon. Introducing the diet websites, although not officially SCD, can be of great support to people who are just starting the SCD commitment. Remember, advice from support groups differ and is subjective. www.breakingthevicious-cycle.info is the only official website and the most authoritative source of information. There is no specified schedule for introducing foods with the exception of homemade yogurt. Some people may appreciate suggested guidelines but they are not generally required. The basic rules given in chapters 9 and 10 are usually sufficient. For example, fruits, other than banana, should be peeled and cooked well. The order for introducing them and some of the vegetables varies with each individual. Going slowly and carefully is best determined by an individual's reactions. This the sensible approach endorsed by the author. Websites which offer prepared SCD foods must be used with caution. Fruit bars, candy bars, juice extracts, etc. are rarely 100% SCD legal. Often, it is impossible to find out what the manufacturers of these products are doing. Also, methods and formulas can be changed without notice. It is best to prepare all foods in the home. Hiring a responsible person to come into your home once a week to bake and freeze entrees and baked goods is a good option to relieve the burden of work at the start. Many SCD foods such as ketchup and mayonnaise, baked goods, and treats, can be made in a few hours and will last through the week. Larger quantities of many items can be frozen in small individual portions. Chapter 10 The Specific Carbohydrate Diet TM Allowable proteins, meat, fish, dairy products, etc. All fresh or frozen beef, lamb, pork, poultry, fish, including shellfish, eggs, natural cheeses, listed in appendix, homemade yogurt made according to recipe in gourmet section, dry curd cottage cheese. Canned fish, canned in oil or water. Not permitted processed meats such as hot dogs, bologna, turkey loaf, spiced ham, breaded fish, canned fish with sauces, processed cheeses, listed in appendix, smoked meats, unless you know definitely that sugar has not been added at some stage in the smoking process. Most available smoked meats contain considerable amounts of refined sugar. In many parts of the country, abattoirs are available that will smoke meats according to your specifications. However, for those people who cannot get their meat smoked without sugar, ordinary smoked bacon may be eaten once a week if it is fried very crisply. Most processed meats are not permitted since they contain starch, whey powder, lactose, or sucrose. It may be possible to obtain hot dogs and other processed meats without these additives and, if so, they may be included in the diet. No canned meats permitted. Allowable vegetables, fresh or frozen, with no added sugar or starch. No canned vegetables, or vegetables packed in jars, are permitted. Artichoke, French but not Jerusalem, asparagus, beets, dried white, navy, beans, lentils, and split peas, dried legumes prepared according to instructions in Gourmet Chapter 1074 section, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, carrots, celery, cucumbers, eggplant, garlic, kale, lettuce of all kinds, lima beans, dried and fresh, mushrooms, onions, parsley, peas, peppers, green, yellow, and red, pumpkin, spinach, squash, summer and winter, string beans, tomatoes, turnips, may be tried after considerable improvement, watercress. Snacks can include raw vegetables provided that diarrhea is not active. Not permitted grains such as wheat, barley, corn, oats, nay, buckwheat, millet, triticale, bulguspel. No cereals, bread, or bur made porn these. Potatoes, white or sweet, yams, parsnips, okra, chickpeas, bean sprouts, soybeans, mung beans, fava beans, garbanzo beans, turnips, may be tried after considerable improvement. Amaranth flour, quinoa flour, or any newly introduced grain substitutes such as cottonseed, wheat germ, seaweeds. Caution: many recipes from other countries, such as couscous, contain grain-like ingredients which must be avoided. Allowable fruits, fresh, raw, or cooked, frozen, with no added sugar, and dried. Canned fruits, or fruits packed in jars, which state packed in own juice, none canned in any other kind of juice. In sweetening cooked or raw fruits, use honey or saccharin. No other artificial sweetener but saccharin is allowed. Apples, avocados, apricots, bananas, ripe with black spots beginning to appear on skin, berries of all kinds, including blueberries, cherries, fresh coconut, or unsweetened shredded coconut, dates, only loose California dates are permitted, dates which stick together in a mass have had syrup or sugar added and are not permitted, grapefruit, grapes, kiwi fruit, kumquats, lemons, limes, mangoes, melons, nectarines, oranges, papayas, peaches, pears, pineapples. Glazed pineapple is permitted only if the glaze is the Specific Carbohydrate Diet TM75, the result of the drying of the natural sugars in the pineapple, prunes, raisins, preferably dark, rhubarb, tangerines. Some people are allergic to sulfites and should avoid dried fruit to which these have been added. If there is no sensitivity to sulfites, this type of dried fruit may be used occasionally. Dried banana chips are usually coated with corn syrup or refined sugar and should be avoided unless they are known to be produced without such additives. Allowable nuts, purchased with or without shells. Almonds, pecans, Brazil nuts, filberts, hazelnuts, walnuts, unroasted cashews, boiled chestnuts. Peanut butter, without additives of any kind. Roasted peanuts in the shell may be tried cautiously after being on the diet about 6 months when diarrhea is gone. Avoid shelled peanuts as most have added starch. Nuts sold in salted mixtures are not permissible since most have been roasted with a starch coating. Note: finely ground up nuts will be referred to as nut flour in the recipes. Use nuts only as nut flour until diarrhea has cleared up. Then, nuts may be used as a snack and should be chewed well. Allowable beverages, see appendix. Juices: canned tomato juice is permissible, only salt added. V8 is not permitted because it contains added tomato paste, which is not allowed. Use tomato juice for cooking instead of canned tomato paste, canned tomato sauce, or canned tomato puree. Avoid canned tomato juice mixtures such as tomato juice cocktail or other tomato juice mixtures. Orange or grapefruit juice, freshly squeezed, or juices, if available, not made from concentrate. All of these without added sugar. While diarrhea is active, avoid orange juice in the morning. If taken in the morning, it tends to Chapter 1076 increase diarrhea. However, it appears to be well tolerated later in the day. Grape juice, white or dark. Bottled grape juice usually has no added sugar, Avoid frozen grape juice, which usually does have added sugar. Pineapple juice, canned, frozen, or fresh, without added sugar. Apple juice, formerly an allowable beverage, has become a problem because some manufacturers are adding corn syrup and sugar which is not listed on the label. Therefore, choose an apple cider packed by a local company you feel is responsible. You can call or write to them to ensure that it is pure apple cider without added sweetener. A preservative such as sodium benzoate is permissible. It is still possible in many areas to obtain freshly pressed apple cider and freeze enough for a year. Caution, fill containers only 2/3 full. Juices packed in boxes, even those which state that there has been no sugar added, should be avoided since experience has shown that they are not well tolerated by those on the specific carbohydrate diet. Freshly squeezed vegetable juices of any of the allowed vegetables. Other beverages: weak tea or very weak coffee, perked or dripped, without milk or cream. Some herb teas can be laxative. Restrict the use of herb teas to peppermint and spearmint. Milkshakes made with homemade yogurt, fruits, sweetened to taste with honey or saccharin. Not permitted fluid milk of any kind. Dried milk solids. Commercially prepared acidophilus milk, which contains unfermented milk along with the acidophilus bacteria, much lactose remains. Commercial buttermilk, commercial sour cream, or commercial yogurt, except for use as a starter for your own Specific Carbohydrate Diet TM77 homemade yogurt. Some companies are producing sour cream which contains virtually no lactose. Inquire concerning the availability of this permissible product in your area. Enzyme-treated milk, except as noted in Chapter 9, milk drunk along with lactase enzyme replacement, in vivo replacement. Soybean milk. Instant tea or coffee. Coffee substitutes, most have malt added which is not permitted. Postum. Allowable confections. A person on the specific carbohydrate diet does not have to be denied sweets and other confections. With the use of honey, nuts, dried fruits, the most delicious cakes, cookies, muffins, and candies may be made. Additional instructions: although grains are not permitted, salad and cooking oils made from grains may be used, therefore, corn and soybean oils are permitted. Other oils which may be used for salads and cooking are sunflower and safflower oils. Olive oil is highly recommended. Thicken gravy with boiled onion pureed in blender or with homemade mayonnaise, see gourmet section for gravy. Unflavored gelatin is to be used for gelatin-type desserts. Mustard is permissible, use plain mustard since gourmet types have many added ingredients which must be avoided. Dill pickles and olives are permissible. Read labels carefully and avoid those with added sugar. Vinegar is permitted, cider, white, or wine. Some gourmet-type vinegars have added sugar and should not be used. Diet soft drinks are permitted occasionally. Those sweetened with aspartame or NutriSweet may sometimes contain lactose and should be avoided, if possible. However, if this is the only type available, one per week is permitted. 78 Chapter 20 Diet soft drinks sweetened with saccharin need not be limited to only one a week, 2 to 3 weekly would be permissible. Do not use diet soft drinks sweetened with any other sweetener. Some can aggravate intestinal problems to a great extent. Bottled water without any additive is permissible, but those which have been marketed as sport drinks, or have added fiber, vitamins, or minerals should be avoided. Soft drinks sweetened with fructose and or glucose should not be used, see next page. Use butter, not margarine. Margarine contains added milk solids and or whey. Cultured butter, if available, is highly recommended. Spices of all kinds may be used. Avoid mixtures such as apple pie spices and curry powder, buy spices such as cinnamon and nutmeg separately. Use fresh garlic and onions instead of garlic and onion powders which may have a starch base. Coconut milk and almond milk may be tried after 3 months, if homemade. See gourmet section. Caution, if eating baked goods with almonds, consumption of almond milk should not exceed 8 ounces, 250 ml, daily. Pasta such as spaghetti and macaroni is made from grains and is forbidden. There are substitutes for pizza and spaghetti in the gourmet section. Do not use cornstarch, arrowroot starch, tapioca starch, sago starch, or other starches of any kind. Do not use chocolate or carob. Do not use bouillon cubes or instant soup bases. Do not use products made with refined sugar. This eliminates many commercially prepared products, some of which are listed in the appendix. Do not use agar-agar or carrageenan. Do not use pectin in making jellies and jams, see recipes for jams in gourmet section. Ketchup is almost 40% sugar and is not permissible. See gourmet section for a quick ketchup. No ice cream unless you make your own. Commercial ice cream is very high in lactose and sucrose. Even those Specific Carbohydrate Diet TM79 commercial ice creams made with honey are often high in lactose. No molasses, corn syrup, or maple syrup. Honey, this is the sweetener of choice. Although many health claims are made for various enzymes, pollen, and other substances to be in the honey, it is preferred that, when on this diet, you use a honey which is fairly clear when held up to light. A slightly cloudy appearance is alright. Pasteurized honey from a store, as well as honey bought from a beekeeper, is fine. Do not use flours made from beans or lentils since beans and lentils were probably not soaked prior to grinding, and in the dried form, they have too high a concentration of starch. Soaked and cooked navy beans, see instructions in gourmet section, may be drained and pureed and used in some of the cake recipes as an extender in order to cut back on the quantity of nut flour required. Do not use baking powder. Use baking soda where specified. Do not use seeds of any kind until 3 months after the last symptom has disappeared, and then try them cautiously. Although all natural cheeses may be used, see appendix, there are 2 cheeses which are considered natural which must be avoided. They are ricotta and mozzarella. The brown, caramelized cheese called Jettoast must also be avoided. Many medications have added carbohydrates of the wrong kind, sucrose, lactose, and starch. Some of these medications may be obtained without these sugars by asking your pharmacist. The pharmacist may substitute and replace these with either fructose or dextrose. He may suggest the same drug but a brand made without lactose and sucrose. However, if the medication is only available with these added carbohydrates, use the medication when essential. However, for your own consumption and food preparation, do not use fructose or glucose syrup nor powdered or granulated fructose, glucose, or dextrose. Although they sound as though they are monosaccharide sugars, in recent years companies are selling 80 chapter 10 them as a mixture of assorted sugars and still retaining the labeling of the single monosaccharide sugars. In other words, they are being mislabeled. Do not use any product which contains Specific Carbohydrate. This form of starch, inulin, may feed halt bacteria as well as friendly bacteria and will defeat the benefits of the diet. If you are using preparations containing me and bacteria, which often contain other ingredients, it is better to use products that contain lactose, or whey, than FOS. Alcoholic beverages: avoid beer. Very dry wine is permissible. If a sweeter wine is desired, add a crushed saccharin tablet or sweeten with honey. Occasionally gin, rye, scotch, bourbon, vodka, etc. No sherry, cordials, liqueurs, or brandy. Club soda is permissible as a mixer since it has no added sugar. The following is a sample day's menu. The quantity of foods eaten should depend upon appetite. It is presented to give an idea of how the specific carbohydrate diet can be implemented. Breakfast: baked apple sweetened with honey, if desired, cinnamon to flavor scrambled eggs, homemade nut muffin with butter and homemade jam, weak tea, coffee, grape juice, or apple cider. Lunch: tuna fish salad made with homemade mayonnaise, garnished with olives, dill pickle, on a bed of lettuce, slices of cheddar cheese. Specific Carbohydrate Diet TM81 homemade pumpkin pie, recipe in gourmet section. Nut crust can be used or the filling can be eaten as a pudding. Pina colada made according To recipe in gourmet section: dinner homemade spaghetti sauce made with ground beef, onions, garlic, herbs, tomato juice. Serve on a bed of boiled beans or spaghetti squash. Freshly grated cabbage salad with homemade mayonnaise or oil and vinegar. Peas and carrots with butter. Fresh fruit or cheesecake. Recipe in gourmet section: tea muffins, bread and pancakes. Basic muffin and bread recipe. Nuts suitable for this recipe are walnuts, almonds, pecans, and filberts, hazelnuts. Peanuts should not be used. Although they are usually very expensive, some people prefer unroasted raw cashews. Raw cashews are highly perishable, so you must be sure that they have been stored properly. Roasted cashews most often contain starch and are, therefore, not permitted. Your choice of nuts should depend upon price, availability, and personal taste preference. Almonds are usually the least expensive and the choice of most people because of their delicate flavor. Almonds with skins, brownish in color, are suitable for this recipe, although, at the beginning of the diet, blanched almonds, without the fibrous skin, will be less gas-forming. After marked improvement, almonds with skins may be used. 25-pound boxes, or larger, often may be purchased at a discount. If large amounts are bought, they should be kept in the refrigerator or deep freeze to prevent rancidity. In the appendix, further instructions, regarding ordering nuts in the most inexpensive way, are given. The nuts must be ground to a fine consistency, a consistency similar to whole wheat flour. If they are overground, they turn into nut butter, which may be used but will make the batter a bit more fluid. It is advisable to grind your own nuts for the first 3 to 4 weeks on the diet. It is true that ground nuts are available and would be a time saver. It is strongly advised, however, that you grind your own to ensure that the ground nuts are fresh and pure with no added extenders. When you have decided to commit yourself to the diet for a longer period, then the ground nuts can be purchased in large quantities in sealed boxes. If the nuts are ground in a blender, do not process more than % cup at one time. Grind to the consistency of whole wheat flour, stopping the blender occasionally and scraping around the sides with a kitchen knife or spatula. The food processor grinds nuts satisfactorily. Use the steel blade and make sure it runs long enough to grind the nuts to the 222 gummet section consistency of whole wheat flour. The nuts may also be ground in an electric or manual food grinder. In the recipes that follow, the term nut flour will be used interchangeably with the term ground nuts. They mean the same thing. The following ingredients make 16 muffins. Preheat oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit 190 degrees Celsius. 2% cups pound nuts, 1/4 cup melted butter or % cup honey F, more or less as desired, cup homemade yogurt, teaspoon baking soda or SD amount OFIT, and teaspoon salt, option juice, or pure apple al, 3 eggs. Eggs must be butter, add last and avoided. Use perted adjust amount dependgesrit to hold ingredients ing on the consistent of batter, together, thoney. All recipes calling for honey as a sweetener work better if honey is in liquid form. If honey has crystallized, melt over low heat. Using a blender, after grinding the nuts in the blender, empty them into a bowl. Place eggs and honey into blender, and mix thoroughly. Add the egg mixture to the nuts and blend by hand or with an electric beater. Add butter or yogurt as needed to bring to a muffin batter consistency. Blend in baking soda and salt. Using a food processor, after grinding nuts, allow the ground nuts to remain in the processor bowl. Add other ingredients, adding butter or yogurt last according to how much liquid you need to bring the batter to a muffin batter consistency. Line cupcake tins with paper cupcake liners. Spoon batter into cupcake tins filling about 1/2 full. Bake at 375 degrees Fahrenheit 190 degrees Celsius for about 15 to 20 minutes or until muffins spring back when pressed. It is difficult to bake light, high muffins without regular flour and the muffins may fall after they have been removed from the oven. This will not affect their taste. Variations: 1. Add LH cup raisins or currants. 2. Add juice of 1 orange and some grated orange rind. 3. Add grated orange rind and chopped dried fruit cut into small pieces. About h cup of any of these: apricots, sun-dried pineapple, apples, pears. 4. Add 1 to 2 teaspoons of grated orange rind and teaspoon almond flavor. 5. Nut bread. Add 1 more egg, 4 altogether, to batter and bake in a well-buttered, 1-quart baking dish. 6. Banana nut bread. Add 1 more egg and 2 mashed extra-ripe bananas to batter. 7. Coconut nut muffins. Substitute dried, unsweetened, grated coconut for part of the nut flour. Do not introduce coconut substitution until diarrhea has cleared up. 8. Elaine's favorite variation. After all other ingredients are mixed thoroughly, stir in gently. 4 cup fresh or frozen blueberries. Milk preparations and infant formula yogurt. Yogurt is one of the oldest foods known to man. Wherever people milked cows, goats, mares, sheep, or camels, a product similar to yogurt was eaten. Kefs, kumis, fermented acidophilus milk, and Bulgarian milk are all similar to yogurt, differing only in the kinds of microbes introduced into the milk. If milk is left unrefrigerated in a warm environment, many types of microbes, bacteria and yeast, in the air, as well as some remaining in the milk, even after pasteurization, start multiplying and using the milk sugar, lactose, as a source of energy. The result is soured milk, which often has a bitter, unpleasant taste and consistency. In making yogurt, this process is controlled by getting rid of the mixture of microbes and introducing only those which produce the tart and tasty product you desire. You may use powdered, skim, 296, or whole milk. If you use powdered milk, add only the amount of powder which you would use to make regular fluid milk. Do not add additional milk powder to fluid milk in order to get a thicker yogurt or more protein, as you will not get a true yogurt and it will be detrimental to those on the specific carbohydrate diet. Whole milk makes a very tasty yogurt, but if you are eliminating fat for a particular reason, you may use low-fat milk. If you do, you must be careful while heating, as it scorches more readily than whole milk. Instructions: 1. Bring 1 quart, or liter, milk to the simmer stage and remove from heat. Stir often to prevent scorching and sticking to the bottom of the pan. 2. Cover and cool until it has reached room temperature or below, may be placed in refrigerator to hasten cooling. It is very important that you allow the temperature to drop sufficiently or you will kill the bacterial culture you are now ready to introduce. 3. Remove about 1/2 cup cooled milk and make a paste with 1/4 cup of good quality commercial yogurt. The commercial yogurt you use should be unflavored and unsweetened. Buy one containing only milk or milk solids and bacterial culture, if possible. It is usually unnecessary to buy yogurt culture separately, since commercial yogurt is very satisfactory to use as a starter. If you find it impossible to buy commercial yogurt which contains only milk and bacterial culture, then you are advised to buy yogurt culture, starter, separately. After removing what is needed, return the container of commercial yogurt to the coldest part of the refrigerator for use as a starter in the next batch of homemade yogurt. Saving some yogurt from a previous batch of homemade yogurt to start a new batch is not as satisfactory as using commercial yogurt as a starter each time. Manufacturers of commercial yogurt make every effort to use lively bacterial strains and extremely large numbers of bacteria in the manufacturing process. The conditions of home refrigeration most often do not promote the survival of yogurt bacteria to the same degree as the conditions maintained by the commercial yogurt producers. Homemade yogurt, made by using some of the last batch as a starter, often fails to solidify, coagulate, properly due to insufficient quantities of live bacteria. 4. Mix the paste with the remainder of the cooled milk and stir thoroughly. 5. Pour milk into any appropriately sized container, cover, and let stand for at least 24 hours at 100-110 degree F, 38 to 43 degrees Celsius. If you forget to remove it after 24 hours, and the fermentation goes on longer, all the better. Under no circumstances should the fermentation time be decreased to less than 24 hours. This fermentation time should supersede any other instructions which may accompany a commercial yogurt maker. The source of heat used during the 24-hour fermentation is critical. It is very important to get the temperature correct at 100-110 degree F, 38 to 43 degrees Celsius, before you proceed with the fermentation. Too high a temperature will kill the bacterial culture and will prevent the proper digestion, conversion, of the lactose. Too low a temperature will prevent activation of bacterial enzymes and will result in incomplete digestion of the lactose. A thermos-type yogurt maker may not be satisfactory for this long fermentation period as the hot water surrounding the thermos will not stay warm. The electric commercial yogurt makers control the temperature perfectly, but the amount of yogurt that can be made at one time is limited. An ideal source of heat is a large electric warming tray. If it has a temperature regulating dial, use a thermometer to set the dial properly. A mouth thermometer is adequate. If the warming tray does not have a dial to control the temperature, cover the surface of the tray with a thickness of metal, such as a metal cake rack, or fire-resistant material, such as a Teflon-treated ironing board cover, and allow the tray to remain on for about 5 minutes before placing the thermometer on the surface to determine the temperature. If too warm, use a thicker piece of metal or material. By using the large surface of the electric warming tray, a gallon of yogurt can be made at one time in 2, plastic or ceramic, half-gallon containers. An electric crock pot set to low, or a heating pad, both checked for temperature, may be used. Some people use their ovens. The pilot in a gas oven usually keeps the temperature in the oven within the correct range. If using the oven of an electric stove, change the oven light to a 60-watt bulb. Turning on the oven light, with a 60-watt bulb, should create enough warmth to make yogurt. Always check the temperature with a thermometer first. Sometimes the oven door must be propped ajar with a little stick to achieve the correct temperature range. Caution: upon completion of yogurt fermentation, replace regular oven bulb. 6. Allow the yogurt to remain on the heat for a minimum of 24 hours to ensure that all lactose is completely digested. Remove from heat gently and refrigerate. While this yogurt may not be as thick as commercial yogurt, it will be a true yogurt since virtually all of the lactose has been digested by the bacterial culture and further lactose digestion will not be required by intestinal cells. Addendum: the Mom and Dad Brigade. This section is dedicated to the memory of my husband, Herbert Adrian Gottschall, who held me up when I could no longer stand. Our daughter's words, written on Father's Day, 1993, 30 years after we knew she was cured, inspired me to add this section to the book. Dear Dad, I remember you running along school lane, hanging onto the back of my two-wheeler, never letting go as one extracted promises by the second that you won't, and, finally I do it. I remember you're driving me to horseback riding lessons every Sunday, you're stopping at the gas station so I could throw up from flogged, beauty hour still urging me to go on and just adoring those lessons. I remember your calm strength through terrible times when Mom could not muster one more ounce of courage through my illness, but you had me convinced that I would get better. And I did. I remember a lot more too because you were a wonderful dad. You taught me how to cherish my kids because you did us. 45 years ago my own child was diagnosed as having an incurable disease, ulcerative colitis. This book is a testament of our family's journey from hopelessness, helplessness, and isolation to a return of not only health for my 164 addendum child, but a desire to prevent needless suffering of other families. Will the feeling of, I must talk to someone who understands, ever leave me? During the years of her illness, each time I heard of someone else with inflammatory bowel problems, the strong urge to communicate overpowered me. I would call strangers anywhere in the world just to talk and seek some measure of understanding and consolation. It has become apparent to me that, as important as scientific information has been to bring about recovery in our children, the support of spouses, friends, and others is not only beneficial but also essential. Those who have battled the store 111 of bowel disease with their own loved ones can give confidence and a large measure of reassurance to those just entering the fray. The addendum of this book is a record of some of the inspiring and compassionate support offered by parents to others as they embark on the specific carbohydrate commitment. Most of this help was given via the listserv * on the internet. These parents have allowed me to include their words in this supplement to Breaking the Vicious Cycle. * A group of over 600 people supporting each other on the internet. Information pertinent to the SCD, Specific Carbohydrate Diet, is shared. The listserv was started by Rachel Tourette after her recovery from ulcerative colitis. From Cindy: Hi. 3 months ago my 7-year-old started having stomach pains from bad gas and bloating. His stomach gets really hard and distended. We started with a GI specialist who put him through a ton of tests that have shown nothing so far. A month into this, he also started moving his head from side to side and bending the waist. He didn't do this all the time, but eating and exercise started the movements. The gas seems to be a trigger for everything going wacky. He had a hard time holding his head up after eating a bagel and was put in the hospital for 3. The mom and dad bengayed 5 days, undergoing a ton of neurological tests that all came back negative. I read about Breaking the Vicious Cycle at Amazon.com and ordered it. At this time we are all devastated here as we are dealing with something that no one has even diagnosed as of yet. I really think this started with gastrointestinal problems and everything is related. When I read this book I started crying uncontrollably because I know I have to do it and it seems so daunting. But I know I have to if the diet can take away the unbelievable gas and bloating and, maybe, some of the neurological symptoms. I want to know if there is anyone else out there who has experienced bending and tilting of the head. My son tells me this makes his stomach feel better, and also if there are any yummy recipes a 7-year-old would like. This is going to be tough for him and all of us. My husband and I are doing it too, for the support we can give him. I know we have to do this, but it is so scary to a mom who isn't a good cook and never aspired to be. Any words of encouragement will be so much appreciated. Thanks, Cindy. The following emails followed within minutes of Cindy's request. From Lisa D. Reading your letter brought back all the feelings we went through when our son became ill. It was such a horrible time and we just didn't know what to do. It was like every black cloud ever created was hovering over us. During the worst of our son's illness, I don't believe I ever slept. I spent countless hours sitting in my living room praying, crying, wondering, and feeling overwhelmed and defeated. I wondered how much longer my son could endure the ravages of this disease and what it was doing to his body. At this time he had not as yet been diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. When he was finally diagnosed, there was a feeling of elation for us for, at least, we knew what he had. It had a name. There was something we could do about it. However, no doctor, at this time, told us that drugs were a short-time answer. After 7 years of 166 addendum going through a series of drugs each time a drug failed to work, we found this diet. It was as if God opened up the heavens. We now know that if my son stays with the diet sufficiently long, he will be well. I wondered at the time if I could manage it, and now, after a year, I can tell you things become easier. All I can say is, give the diet a try, give yourself time, and don't beat yourself up over mistakes because you will make them. We all have. In the end it will give your child a wonderful gift and you will have given yourself a whole new sense of purpose. Please know that we will try to be as helpful as we can and do not be afraid to ask questions and voice your fears. Lisa D. From Brenda: Cindy, I know you can do it. I have Crohn's and an ileostomy now. I've had Crohn's for 16 years and an ileostomy for 3 years. My son was showing signs of bowel problems, so he was colonoscoped and subjected to other tests, which showed nothing. I put him on SCD, I'm on it too, and everything cleared up. He had a lot of gas pains in his stomach and his chest wall. He also had trouble keeping his feet still. In his own words, at 10 years old, after putting him on the diet for about 2 weeks, he told me his feet didn't want to move anymore. That winter he excelled at school and also in indoor soccer as he was much more focused. After a while, his friends, our family, and the teacher became very accustomed to his eating habits, and it wasn't a big deal at all. In fact, the neighborhood kids sure like those peanut butter cookies. As a mom, I can see that you will be surprised to find what you can do when your own kids are involved. I'm a single parent and my son is now 13. One do not want to see anybody go through that emergency surgery I went through to have my ileostomy. Hope this helps. Brenda from Carrie Klein. Cindy, you can do it. I didn't experience head bending, but gas and distension were symptoms of mine before the mom and dad Bengade 167 one started on this diet. The gas is gone. The distension is much improved. People on the listserv will respond, and here are some ideas to try, after you follow the introductory diet in breaking the vicious cycle. Remember, try one new food at a time at the beginning. Smoothies made from homemade yogurt, ripe banana, honey, strawberries. Peanut butter and honey spread on peeled apples. Cheese chips, grate cheddar cheese. Melt small piles in skillet until crispy and flip and cook the other side, then cool until hard. There are so many great recipes for cakes and desserts in Breaking the Vicious Cycle and Lucy's cookbook. And don't forget, you can make him frozen yogurt treats by pouring smoothies into popsicle molds and freezing. Good luck, Carrie from Katie. Hi, Cindy. A lot of people believe that intestinal problems cause a lot of other weird problems. I am sure that this diet is worth a try. I never thought I could follow it, as I was a total pizza and junk food addict. I was also deathly ill from Crohn's and have 3 little kids, 5 years old and under, so I had to do it. Now 6 months later, I am miraculously I-11 remission and feeling wonderful for the first time in 25 years, I am now 35. I love this diet. I wouldn't have believed that before. There are so many wonderful substitutes for most foods. The nut flour baking is wonderful and is extremely healthy. The most important thing is to never let your son get hungry. You know how hard it is to resist temptation when you are hungry. Always keep plenty of snacks available, and here are some, which we find especially good: peanut butter cake, monster cookies, cinnamon cookies from Lucy's cookbook, coconut cookies, macaroons, frozen yogurt, cashew peanut butter, the nuffins from BTVC, frozen juice pops. I am sure some of the anoms will write you with their favorites. Oh, one more, cheese fries made out of fried Monterey Jack cheese sticks. It does seem hard at first, but it really seems easy after a while. It just becomes a habit. Good luck. Katie 168 addendum and another email of encouragement from Pam Williams. Your anxiety and love for your son came through loud and clear in your posting on the SCD list. The diet looks daunting, we know, especially for someone who doesn't love cooking. As another uninspired cook, let me share how SCD can change the way you think about food. The hardest part is getting started. Many SCDers said to themselves, I'll try it for a month and see how it goes. If your son is like hundreds of people on this list, he'll start to feel better within that month. You'll start to appreciate that what goes in his mouth contributes to his well-being and health, and that diet is a natural, ancient way to nurture the people you love and positively affect their well-being. Before SCD, I would go completely blank in a supermarket when faced with all the options and absolutely no inspiration to cook them. On the SCD, I went from eating whatever was easy and handy to feeling all proud and nurturing when my yogurt came out soft and snuggly. Food changes from a chore to a healthy, natural tool to get back some control in a situation that seems out of control and out of your hands. With love, Pam. And from Donna Bochner, Brett's mom. Just to reintroduce myself. I'm the mother of a 15-year-old, Brett, who has been on the SCD for about 10 months. Brett has Crohn's, but thanks to SCD has been living life like any other teenager: school, going out with friends, playing baseball, lifting weights, marching in the school band, and, generally, having a wonderful life. Brett decided to share his success on the SCD with others and has posted information about SCD on various websites for inflammatory bowel disease sufferers. The response that he has received has been wonderful. So far, he has directed several people to the listserv. Of course, Brett did hear from one skeptic who attacked Brett's endorsement of SCD with a vengeance. Brett didn't let the doubter get to him, and yesterday felt so good when he was the mom and dad Bengade 169 able to talk about diet and Crohn's with two distraught parents whose teenagers are very ill. They sounded as crazed as I was when Brett was first diagnosed, and they seemed eager to investigate the SCD further. I am so proud of my son and just wanted to let you know how important it is to try the diet for your son. Donna. And from Martha, I'm Jonathan's mom. I've been swamped with activity lately and haven't been able to write, but I want you to know that I am thinking of you. Jonathan is 10 and was diagnosed with Crohn's disease 2 years ago. We started the diet about then on our naturopathic doctor's advice. I know that the beginning may seem rough, but now, 1 year later, my SCD, Specific Carbohydrate Diet, family of 5 is all thriving and I am cooking with ease. The cup can be viewed as half full. Think of the frontier women without supermarkets, electricity, and appliances. That sounds like my grandma's life with a lot more children to cook for. Several people on the list wrote to me with suggestions on how to get through the first few parties. You can bring substitute food for your son such as homemade pizza, legal cake, etc. At this point, however, my son simply accepts that he will not be eating all that other stuff without any expressed negative emotion. You will get there too, once you witness how the diet makes everyone feel better. Good luck, you are on the right path. Martha. From Lisa Ercolano, your post about how much Danny is suffering brought tears to my eyes. My daughter, Olivia, is 11, and has Crohn's disease, and she, too, had lost weight due to the disease and its symptoms. But good news, though. She has gained 4.5 pounds in the 3+ weeks that she has been eating the specific carbohydrate diet. There is no question that it may seem difficult at first. We had not yet realized how easy it is to get the few substituted ingredients. However, 170 addendum within a week, we had stocked our fridge with all kinds of fruits and vegetables. I bought legal canned fruits and made cocktails of the different kinds, and finally got going with the homemade yogurt. I know your son is not as old as my daughter, so it is probably a little more difficult to explain to him the fact that eating only healthy foods will help him get well. But if you do the hard thing, to get rid of anything in your cupboards that is not SCD, he will eat the goodies you make, he really will. He will also quickly learn that he feels better when he eats these things, so he will want to eat more. I have found that eating this diet with Olivia helps her to accept it. It is how the rest of us show support for her and belief in the diet. I know from first-hand experience how painful it is to see one's child wasting away. But all I can do is reassure you that this way of eating works. Hang in there. Eat SCD yourself. Let Danny bake and cook with you if he feels up to it. Your boy will be bouncing back in no time is my guess. It wouldn't hurt to do something nice for yourself like a hot bubble bath and good book when he is in bed. You are under a lot of stress. From Patty. I just had to chime in here. My daughter, Tabitha, just turned 7, has Crohn's disease. She has been suffering from this monstrous thing since she was at least 4 years old. She would tell you the diet is definitely worth it. In fact, she was just telling me earlier, my tummy doesn't hurt anymore since I have been on the diet. Before we found the diet, my precious baby only weighed 32 pounds. That is very small for, at that time, she was 6 years old. She had a mean fistula in her rectum. I watched with horror as my sweet Tabitha bled into the toilet time after time. Just thinking about the torture of it all gives me a very queasy feeling. My heart ached for her, as she was unable to play and at times too weak to even get out of bed. I started her on the diet about a month ago, and she is very glad that I did. I have complete control over what she eats because I homeschool her. I keep a food and weight diary and record her symptoms daily. After all that the mom and dad Bengade 171 we have been through, I waxcelled to give the diet an honest chance and keep a careful record to eliminate all doubts. A week or two before we started the diet, Tabitha said rate, test for inflammation, was 78. 2 weeks after starting the diet, it was 5. She is symptom-free, weighs 44 pounds and is bursting at the seams with energy. She plays every day now. A simple thing such as playing is a big thing to me and to her. One hope my email helps in some way to keep you focused. You may hit some rough patches from time to time, but I think you can stay on the road. And from Chrysia to the author, dear Mrs. Gottschall, my name is Chrysia Morin and I am 11 years old. I am writing to tell you that without your helpful book I would not be the healthy girl that I am today. I started having bad stomach aches when I was 6 and as the years went by the pain worsened until I could not sleep at night. We used a scale from 1 to 10 to gauge the pain, with 10 being the worst. Sometimes the pain reached 8 on the scale. My mom took me to the doctor several times but all they did was take more tests. One doctor even said, wait until she is stunted before doing anything. Lauren kept going to the library and finally found your book and we decided to try it out. Within a week the pain went down to 3 and Sonia Tirkzone. Within 6 months, the pain had totally stopped. I have been on the diet for 3 years and only when one eat forbidden foods will I get a stomachache. I want to thank you again for all the work and research that you put into your book and I will never forget what you have done for me. Yours truly, Chrysia Morin. Isaiah's story. Isaiah is a 12-year-old boy with regressive autism. He was born perfectly normal, and actually progressed ahead of schedule. A series of ear infections, oral antibiotics, immunization is dan exposure to the wild virus 172 addendum strain of chicken pox caused Isaiah to suffer a loss of language, eye contact, joint attention, behavioral self-modulation, and the general ability to verbally communicate his needs, problems, and pain. He developed a severe and persistent gastrointestinal overgrowth of yeast, alternating constipation and diarrhea, food allergies, seasonal allergies, autistic enterocolitis, and lymphoid hyperplasia. It was so painfully debilitating that it caused him to cry and scream, as he tried to find physically comfortable positions. It also caused him to miss many days of school. Isaiah followed a strict casein and gluten-free diet for the past 6 years, with variable and minor improvement. He continued to battle chronic yeast overgrowth, clostridia, alternating diarrhea and constipation, abdominal pain, gas, and bloating. He failed to acquire social and language skills, to the degree it seemed he should. In retrospect, his tantrums, mood changes, and behavioral outbursts were all essentially related to his state of bowel function and discomfort. In a practice of treating well over 100 children with diagnoses of autism spectrum disorders, I must say that despite rigorous implementation of the casein-free and gluten-free diet, or free from any identified IgG allergens, as well as informed supplementation, I have not seen children improve to the extent and in the fashion one would anticipate. These children cannot implant normal flora, or eradicate clostridia or yeast. Despite nearly heroic interventions to correct these problems, and heal the gut, we see continuing deficiencies in nutrients, fatty acids, and amino acids, as well as ongoing bowel problems. Since starting the Specific Carbohydrate Diet 6 months ago, Isaiah has demonstrated impressive progress. He has had a normal stool every day since the 3rd day on the diet. On the one occasion that he was exposed to birthday cake and ice cream, he developed diarrhea for 2 days, and cried the entire time. When he resumed the SCD, the diarrhea and crying stopped, and have not returned. Isaiah has made significant, rapid progress in developing more language skills. His sentence structure has become more complex, he utilizes appropriate pronouns, and engages in spontaneous conversation. He has developed the mom and dad Bengade 173 an interest in football, forsaking more juvenile interests, such as Thomas the Tank Engine. He has become a champion speller. He has been included in the full-day, 6th grade classroom, with supports. Last year, he spent 50% of his school time alone with an individual teacher, because he could not stop crying, and performing almost constant obsessive-compulsive routines. He missed over 50 days of school last year due to severe abdominal pain, crying, pacing, and screaming. Learning is difficult, at best, under those circumstances. With love, respect, and gratitude, Pamela J. Farrow. Further details regarding Isaiah's story may be found on the website, www.breakingtheviciousscycle1e.info. Some emails ask why something is considered an illegal food on the diet. Although the scientific ground rules are given for practically every food eliminated, often individuals want more detailed reasons. To answer every one of these questions would be impossible. The inclusion or elimination of certain foods is based on the clinical findings of Dr. Sidney Valentine Haas's work as reported to the author in the 19701s, as well as many years of research on the chemical structures of certain molecules, work done by the author. 174 addendum. An outstanding email was sent in by Daphne to one of the questioning correspondents. It sounds as though you are having trouble with your friend's adherence to the diet. Can you help him understand that trying to analyze the contents of every item on SCD is a zero-sum game? The nature of organic molecules is extremely complex. A glucose molecule alone contains 24 atoms in a complex three-dimensional structure, and any given starch can contain thousands of simple sugars attached in a huge variety of configurations. Then there is the interaction of carbohydrates with heat, time, and other components of food. And there are so many factors in how our bodies interact with foods, our bacterial ecosystems, thousands of different microorganisms, the many enzymes that break down foods, our microvilli, our cellular absorption. Most popular nutrition books break nutrition into three categories: carbohydrate, protein, and fat. But in reality, it is far more complex. The specific carbohydrate diet should be considered evidence-based medicine. We follow it because it works for many people. Period. If we try to tweak it to our hopes and wishes, you will get nowhere but very confused. Nutrition is still in the dark ages, about where pure chemistry was 150 years ago. The importance of vitamins was only recognized in the middle part of the 20th century. Compound that with the massive influence of the food industry on science and medicine, and the fact that the chemical composition of foods is changing rapidly due to agri-tech, etc. And consider the difficulty of conducting clinical trials in nutrition because there are so many factors for which to control. And consider the fact that each scientist can only focus on one tiny piece of a huge puzzle. The specific carbohydrate diet is a beacon of light in a black hole of misinformation as far as I am concerned. But until the time that teams of researchers and millions of dollars can be put into it, no one can answer your every question about why.
If you like this audiobook, please like and subscribe. This will help us create more quality content so that you can enjoy your time with us.